You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper than
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of What If Naruto Enters Elden Ring. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of NeonZangetsu on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Fool of a tarnished, MELINA kicked out at a nearby table with a shriek and sent it flying, books and candles all. Near the door, Ensha rewarded her with a flat look for her tantrum. He went summarily ignored. As well he should. Gideon's man could glare at her all day for all she cared. His ire would avail him not a jot. For you see, her anger was not directed his way. She almost wished it were. Things would be so much simpler. My lady. Corin dared to peek round the corner. Are you all right? I heard a crash. MELINA glared bloody red daggers at the prophet and he withdrew. Good man. Wise man. He knew not to mess with an angry woman. Unlike some, never in her short life had she been so singularly frustrated by a single being, nay, utterly confounded by one man, a single soul such as this. Yet here she stood, seething like some churlish child. It galled her to no end. Bad enough that Naruto paid little heed to suggestion or such. Bad enough that he seemed content to wander without a worry in the world. Bad enough that he'd proven himself wholly incapable of doing anything the easy way. But this was too far, even for her. Atrish was positively aggrieved at his abrupt disappearance and Roderica feared him dead. He was not, of course. Even now their pact persisted, she could sense him. Which was precisely what alarmed her so. By the Erdtree, what was he doing in Caelid? At first she'd thought he was off seek General Radon, but no. He was puttering about the wilds with a dragon of all things. It rankled her to no end. It would be a simple matter to decorporealize herself and go herring after him. But even that would take time. Days perhaps, to track him down. She could hardly teleport to his side at such a distance after all. Even if she could, she would not be able to drag that tree sentinel after her so easily, let alone the spirit tuner. Their place was at the round table hold, she reasoned, out of sight, out of mind. Wasn't it? Her tarnish did not want for distractions, and as such she would endeavor to keep him on track. She had been created with a singular task in mind. Nothing more. She knew her purpose, her goal. Clearly this tarnish did not know his. Someone would have to beat it into his head, and T would not be her. He could not save everyone and everything. He'd merely been lucky thus far. One could only hope Caelid would teach him that lesson. MELINA prayed it would. She shuddered to think what his plans might be. Who knew what manner of depravity he was getting up to without her guidance? Lech? Yeah, sure, whatever. Greyroll pursed her lips and glared at his back. Thou art a knave. That's nice. All she received was a half-hearted wave for her efforts. You're pretty, too, she hissed. Do not ignore me, you fiend. He still didn't answer her, of course, the absolute fiend. Instead he kept right on marching, forcing her to follow him or risk being left behind, left to fend for herself in her weakened state. As she was now, she knew such would be a death sentence. She was the mother of dragons, and yet in this current fleshy form. Her own children scarcely knew her. They did not recognize their matriarch. To linger in her barrow now would surely spell her doom. They would have to fend for themselves for a time until she regained her strength. Her true form was large and powerful indeed, but she'd not moved for how long. Greyroll missed a step. The answer escaped her and the dragoness realized with a bleat of panic that she couldn't recall how long. Many moons had passed since she first found herself entrapped by that wicked witch's rot. A very long time indeed, then. Accursed demigod. Her barrow had been both bountiful and peaceful before she came along. How many children did she lose when that foul flower first bloomed? How many eggs had perished in clutches hence? More than she cared to count. Wretched Melania. She would suffer when they met again. In the meantime, she would follow this one. Like her kin Lanceeks before her, she would wear this human guise for a time, but only that. A short while, little more. She would stay with this one until her strength was recovered, and not a moment more. She would not be tricked. She would not be beguiled into falling for a mere mortal as her daughter had with that fool Vike. Feelings had led Lanceeks astray, as all humans oft did. Where had love led her? Nowhere. To madness and despair. She would not succumb to such. You know, if you keep glaring at me like that, you're gonna go blind. Gia ra 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 ra. T wasn't her fault. She could not feel free without her wings and tail. She dare not conjure them in this fleshy guise for fear of falling over outright. Merely holding this form at all threatened to exhaust her, but she would not consent to ride the fiend's horse. She was a proud warrior. She had no need of some simple steed. Not she. Come on, now. Again his voice rose to mock her for her failure. You're falling behind. Keep up. He clapped his hands. Chop, chop. A trickle of fire escaped her clenched teeth. Whose fault is that? Thy legs are too long. Thou walketh too fast, and you complain too much. Came the answering titter. Try smillin' a little. Greyroll huffed. Who was he to talk to her as such? She was the mother of dragons. He was just a squishy mortal, a mere tarnished. Was his fault she was in this mess. And really, where was he leading her? He didn't seem to know himself. Down, down, down they went, deeper into the Kaled wilds, pausing at odd intervals, but never lingering in one place for long. More than once they stumbled upon embattled soldiers facing horrid abominations. The latter he put to the torch, the former he spared. Still he did not stop, even to bask in air thanks. After some time, his goal became apparent to her eyes, if only partially. He was in search of something, or perhaps someone, though she knew neither what nor who. Why are we wandering, Lech? Eventually, she asked him. This pointless posturing avails you not. All right, I tried. Here at last, Naruto finally looked over his shoulder, betraying some irritation. Would you stop calling me a lech? I ain't done a thing to you. He squinted back at her, briefly resembling the mighty beast he housed within. If anything, been perfectly pleasant. Greyroll's face flamed, even as her horns twitched. You saw every inch of mine body. You touched, lady, he countered, with all the exasperation of a parent explaining something to a small child. I got you out that rot. If not for me, you'd still be lying there, wasting away. Cut me some slack. HMMPH. Slack, he said. She crossed both arms before her bosom. I would have freed myself eventually. Oh, is that so? His tone told her she had blundered into an altogether trap, but she, for the life of her, she couldn't see where. Well, if you say so. Was that his angle? Did he think to impress her with his prowess as dragons had before? I will not mate with thee, if that is thine desire. Wasn't asking you to. His right eye began to twitch. You know, I thought a dragon turning into a human would be pretty cool and all, but you're starting to kill the appeal. Then seek Lanceeks if I offend you so. She bared her fangs in a sneer. But be warned, mine daughter is far less kind than I. It was not her kin's fault. Vike's descent into madness after touching the frenzied flame had left little Lanceeks quite distraught. Even now she sought a way to cure her beloved dragon knight. Silly girl. The only cure for the three fingers touch was death. Still a better fate than that of poor Fortisax. Naruto scoffed. If this is kind, I'd hate to see a pissed off dragon. He paused suddenly, touching a hand to his head. She frowned. Does something ail thee? Not you. He waved a hand half-heartedly her way. At this place. There's so much pain in this place. He touched a hand to his temple, gritting his teeth. So many emotions. Negativity in spaces. Those eyes drifted shut, paying her little head. Gotta fix this place. Have to fix it. Something twitched in the worm's heart. It felt like pity. You're but one man. You can only do so much. Have you not seen the clones I've been sending out? Mere copies. She'd seen one vanish with a single hit. They will avail thee not. Where are you looking now? Because his eyes had snapped open suddenly and his head whipped around, startling her terribly. But those wild blue orbs weren't fixed on her. They pivoted, regarding the distant spire of a crumbling church. Narrowed. Then he was off, shooting forth like an arrow loosed from a bow. All that remained was a fading plume of dust. Greyroll bucked. Wait. She stumbled after him, cursing her human legs all the while. I say, wait. He kept running. Wait at once, blast thee. There was so much to fix here in the Kaled wilds. Too much for one man, certainly. It would take an army to undo the damage here. The longer Naruto wandered, the more certain he became of this immutable thought, and in time, thought became fact. And the more he wandered, the more clones he'd sent out, desperate to stem the tide of rot and all the pain he felt here. Kill the monsters, save the soldiers, fix what he could, smack down those who wouldn't listen. Unfortunately, in doing so, he'd made a bit of a blunder, one he'd realized too late to correct. With so many perspectives, dozens, easily taking in so much as once, his mind was beginning to fray. He experienced it all, every moment of pain, every death, every twisted sight. Creating more to compensate for the deaths of the first wave only made it worse. Yet still he persisted. He had to. He must. If don't, who will? You need to stop. It's only been a day, and already you're reaching your limit. If you don't rest soon, you'll break. Oddly enough, he felt the ring on his finger pulse in agreement. Fine. He slurred. Just a little longer. Lingrave might have had a rotten ruler in the form of Godric, but at least the landscape itself wasn't actively rotting. Not like this place. How could he rest when everything around him was suffering? His senses twisted again, pinpointing another pulse of pain. Numbly, he followed it. There, to the east, coming from that crumbling church on the hill, he sensed life. Harmless human life. Not mindless or mad like those wild beasts, nor those twisted knights shambling through the swamps to cut him down like those soldiers. Faint, flickering, fading like a dying flame. Really, the wilds were the worst. Everything bar a certain surly dragon girl wanted to kill him. As he crept closer to the ruined stone edifice, he realized it wasn't quite as abandoned as he'd first surmised. Closer inspection revealed a pair of ghastly guards manning the entrance, spears in hand. They were even more monstrous than those giant hounds. A small sigh escaped him as he rolled up his sleeves. Blue eyes flashed gold. Well, he grumbled, at least they ain't ghosts. The pests did not die well. The rot burned. It vibrated in Millicent's veins, seethed in her soul, fouled her very flesh. Every breath was an agony. The very act of keeping her eyes open threatened to drain what little life she had left. Even her mind, her last bastion of refuge, was not spared. Whispers hunted her every waking moment like so many buzzing flies, stealing away even the petty semblance of peace that madness might offer. Truly, if there was suffering worse than this, she did not wish to experience it. Worse, she couldn't die, not truly, not as she wished. The rot prevented even her own demise. For now, it would not grant her the destined death she sought, no matter how much she wished for it. She could only lay and waste away. With each passing hour she felt herself slip further into the abyss. How it burned, how it stung. It would be so easy to give in to the whispers, to simply let the rot out and bloom until nothing remained. Accursed rot. Why did it have to be her? What had she done to deserve this? Fate denied her even the memory of it. Was it not enough that she'd severed her own arm? How much more would this foul taint take from her, and why was it dark all of a sudden? Against her better judgment, Millicent looked up. Bright blue eyes beamed back at her, set within a whiskered face framed by unruly blonde hair. Those same cheeks dimpled in a sunny smile, one that was decidedly offset by his haggard appearance. "Villian," the young man chirruped happily. "You all right there?" "All right." Her temper stirred and the rot in her rose with hit. All right. Of course she wasn't. No, don't take the bait. No doubt this was another figment of her addled imagination. Another specter come to torment her for failures she could no longer remember. Had it chosen the guise of hope this time? She knew not this stranger. Millicent hung her head, lacking the energy to even shoo him away. "Please," she croaked. "Leave me. You're just another hallucination. I shan't be tempted." She would not give in to the rot. She knew not why, only that she shouldn't. She mustn't. The tiny core that was her soul, which had forgotten so much, still remembered the warning she had given her, even now. Sweet though the whispers were, she knew she must never heed them. "Do not bloom, little Millicent. You mustn't bloom. Nay, never bloom." A low chortle reached her ears, cutting into the memory. Hallucination. That's a new one. Never been called that before. A spark of irritation seethed within the rot. With it came a tiny surge of strength. "What? Still here?" A weak growl tore free from her. "Begone with you. You know, you're being pretty rude." Much to her chagrin, the hallucination knelt before her. "I'm just trying to help." Did he not understand? Her lips curled in a pained grimace. "I cannot be helped." He leaned back on his haunches. "I disagree." Still he persisted. She was not having this conversation. She would not speak to this golden ghost, and yet he seemed determined to drag it from her regardless. Had she control of her legs, she would have simply walked away from him. As she was now, she could only turn her head to the side and sulk. Was this to be her end, then? Tormented by the madness. "There you are. Now what?" Millicent could no longer raise her head. That brief burst of strength had faded, taking what little she had left. But she heard the voice, saw the pair of pale, almost gray feet pad into her field of vision. Yet another figment of her imagination come home to roost. She was a woman, and this one had left her ankles exposed. How unseemly. "Oh, hey." Distantly, she heard the blonde specter speak. "You caught up. Good. Think you can help me with this?" The woman scoffed, sniffed, then recoiled with a yelp. "Impossible." Her lower lip curled with disgust. "She's infected by the rot. I would not touch her for all the gold in the lands between. I shan't be entrapped again." Millicent heard the man sigh. "Gray, I shall not," she snapped. "And neither should you. Keep away from her." Remarkably sensible, for a figment of her imagination, this. She's right. Leave me be. Nope. 2 fingers flitted out to flick her forehead. Little more than a poke. And yet, Millicent jolted upright, gasping in surprise. Her body screamed in protest at the sudden movement, but she forced her eyes open once more, if only to regard the baffling blonde looming over her. A trembling hand rose to touch her forehead. She'd felt that. Pain, minor perhaps, but she'd felt him touch her. Hallucinations could not do such. You're real. No, it matters. Her foggy vision cleared, if only for a moment, to see them. If you are wise, you will leave immediately. The stump of her right arm pulsed painfully and she gripped it with a gasp, strangling a whimper of pain in her throat. My flesh writhes with scarlet rot. It is more than a simple disease, it is a curse, not to be meddled with by man. There, she'd said her piece. Real or not, this one would wish nothing to do with her now. To touch her would put him at risk of infection, agonizing sickness, and finally, certain death. She tried to quell the tiny pang of sorrow that followed. It'd be nice to speak with someone, if only in passing. But it could never be. Only those putrid pests love the rot. All else should give her a wide berth. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, certain that boorish blonde braggart would be well and truly gone when she opened them again. The woman gave an annoyed in response to a question Millicent hadn't heard. Do what you will. I'll have no part in this. The blonde laughed. Such a grumpy dragon. Mortal, I will bite thee. Promises, promises. Wait. Slim arms encircled Millicent's waist. Why was she moving? Rising into the air. Pushing away the cobwebs from her thoughts, she forced her eyes open once more. The stranger had indeed walked away for all of an instant. With her eyes closed, she'd not seen him spin around, swept both arms under her and oh, dear. Millicent realized what must have transpired and squeaked, a sharp unladylike sound she had made only once before. Cease, she cried out. Why are you carrying me like some princess? You'll be infected with the rot. Oh, is that what this is? His smile shone down at her, brighter than the Erd tree itself. The rot in her tried to touch him and was summarily repelled. Tickles, tickles. Did he have resistance to it? No matter. It wouldn't last. It never did. Sometimes the rot took one swiftly, at other times slowly, as it had her. In the end, his fate would be no different than those of the clean rot knights who had served MELINA. Who was MELINA? No. Focus. Leave go of me. She kicked out feebly against his chest, feeling ever but a child. What are thou doing? This is no place to die. He looked down at her, heedless of the veins scrawling against his flesh. I'm taking you somewhere safe. A tiny, bitter laugh burst out of her. This is Caelid. 'Tis not safe anywhere. She was not prepared for the growl that followed. Then I'll make it safe. Something in those words, nay, the noble presence behind them, stirred her spirit. A seed of something sprouted in her. Almost felt like hope. Even now she could feel the rot writhing in her, potent as ever. It wanted in, to corrode and infect the stubborn young man who even now held her. It sought him as it had sought all others around, seeking another victim, a second means of infection. Tethers of death and dismay tried to coil around him as they had all before, and yet still he stood tall. Don't worry. Mistaking her silence for confusion, the whiskered warrior touched her forehead with his chin. If I can grow back an eye, I'm pretty sure I can do the same for an arm maybe. Hope flowered in Millicent's heart and withered thrice as fast. What madness did he speak of? One could not simply restore an arm, not even the sorcerers of the academy. Maybe he was a hallucination after all. This could merely be a mad fever dream brought on by the rot. Growing back an arm. Only a fool would say such. A fool among fools indeed, the greatest fool of them all. The dragon woman snorted behind him. Foolish boy. Naruto clicked his tongue at her. Angsty dragon. Go stand in the corner if you're gonna keep bitching at me. The ghost of a smile touched Millicent's lips despite herself. So he had a bit of spine after all. You dare. Dare he did indeed, because he laughed and laid Millicent down against a nearby headstone. She scarcely had the strength to squint when his body blazed gold. A pitiful noise escaped her lips as she averted her eyes. So bright. If he'd shimmered before, then now he was well and truly the sun. Merely laying in his presence made her aching body feel warm. As she squinted on, the blonde rubbed his palms together. Might want to clench your teeth, Miss Millicent, she whimpered, dreading what was to come. My name is Millicent. Naruto. Nice to meet ya. Think happy thoughts. She bridled but a little as the whiskered one laid his right hand on her shoulder, lacking the strength to do anything else. Her spirit stilled as he reached out with the other to grip her remaining hand. Rough fingers worn by war threaded against hers, bringing a faint flush to her pale face. To touch her twice now without even commencing courtship. How very vulgar. He'd not even written her a single letter. Terribly forward. I do not see the point in the eyes. Her words peaked into a wild bleat of pain as the mangled stump of her shoulder burned with unseen heat. Something flowed down her ruined arm, burning hotter than the rot ever had. her back arched, lips parting in a wordless scream. Every cell in her body burned. In moments she found herself doubling over, weeping, wailing, eyes burning with tears. "Stop," she gasped out. "It hurts. I beg of thee. Cease, please." He listened at once, bless his simple soul, leaving her wasted and gasping for air. "Something's resisting me." That tan face stood creased in a scowl. "Probably that rot thing you're talking about." Still, it worked a little. Millicent looked down and balked. There was a stub there, half her arm jutting out through her tied and tattered sleeve, just short of her elbow. Her eyes bulged. "What are you?" "Someone who wants to help ya." His smile was telling. "Does it matter?" She opened her mouth to argue, then deferred. "No, I suppose not." On a whim, she made a reckless decision. Her days were numbered. She would rather die a warrior than a worthless wretch. She had been a warrior once. She was certain of that. She remembered the grief she'd felt as she severed her sword arm. That vain attempt to stop the rot in its early days, before her sisters cast her aside. This was a chance she would not let slip by. "Finish it," she rasped. His brow shot up. "You sure? It's gonna hurt. Please, I beg of thee, let me die as I lived." She raised her gaze, hoping to convey her intent with a steady look as much as words. "With both arms, all right, but nobody's gonna die on my watch." She watched him like a hawk as he rubbed his palms together. That odd mark on his right hand seemed to shimmer softly in the low light. This time she thought herself ready for it. She was not. He laid both hands on her, exhaled softly, spoke something under his breath, and then, "Pain," Millicent cried out, gritting her teeth as bone and sinew erupted from the fouled flesh of her arm. A far cry from before perhaps, but pain nevertheless. She gripped at him with her good hand. "Sorry," she heard him mutter over her cries. "Just hang on a little longer. I've almost got it there." Sobbing, hiccuping, she pushed against him, instinctively seeking comfort. He held her, patted her head, hummed a little, and finally it was done. Naruto laid her down to rest upon a softer patch of ground. And it was then that she saw it, felt it, sensed it. Bleary eyes blinked, gazing upon the pale expanse of her new limb. It twitched and trembled, fitfully at first as she exerted her will upon it. Move. It had to move. This would all be for nothing if she couldn't make it move. Tremulous fingers curled into a fist. Millicent released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Just like that, he'd regrown her lost limb. A healthy arm, free of the rigorous rot that had once pervaded it, but not for long. Even now it ached and itched as the foul disease sought to eat away at it once again. Her spirits fell at the sensation. She'd feared as much. The reprieve he'd granted her was temporary at best. "You have my thanks, but the rot still writhes within me. I beg you, keep your distance." "Ain't done yet." "What?" "I beg your pardon, good sir." Blinking through teary eyes, her gaze fixed on his chest, noting the faint shimmer beneath his ratted jacket. Her mouth went dry as she sensed the faint pulse of power within. The ghost of an old memory stirred within her, indistinct, faded by time, but prevalent nonetheless. She'd seen such a thing once before. But where? Is that a great rune? Yup. He smacked his lips and made her comfortable once more. Got it from a guy named Godric. Godric the Great. Memories came rushing back. He'd slain him, them. No mere tarnished was this. Perhaps this was the one. The one to be accepted by the Erd Tree. Destined to restore the broken Elden Ring, to make what was once fractured whole again. She looked up at him, and for a moment, she saw something in him. A glimpse of the future that might yet come to pass. Long live the new Elden Lord. "All right," her savior hummed, "now that we've got your arm sorted, let me try a different approach this time." Millicent betrayed herself with a whimper. "I'm not ready." The knight, for Millicent could see this proud, stubborn sod as nothing less, seemed to take offense at that. "Don't worry. It won't hurt this time." He hooked a finger in hers. "Promise." "Truly?" Her voice hitched. The look he gave her was pure steel. "I'm gonna fix your everything." Millicent shook her head. She could just imagine him, running about trying to help everyone. It was admirable and unbearably naive. She would appreciate the return of her arm, short-lived though her life was. He was a boon she'd not thought to hope for, but he'd granted it to her. To hope for anything else would surely be folly, wouldn't it? "You've done enough," he scoffed. "Who decided that?" "No, wait. I haven't prepared my thaw." She bit her fist to stifle a gasp. Oh, rather than set to work on her arm and regrow the severed stump as he'd tried before, he went to the work on the rest of her, starting with her chest. She tensed at once, expecting pain. There was none. By contrast, this was warm. It felt quite nice actually. Very nice. Her body bucked and her arms betrayed her, hooking behind his neck. As if she'd been placed in a warm bath and left to simmer, so too did she feel the aches and pains of her body melt away. Little mewling gasps fled from her lips as she buckled against him, head buried into his shoulder, holding on for dear life. Warm, so very warm. She could feel that strange energy of his working its way through her, flowing like a warm river. To let go now was to drown. Little fireworks burst beneath her skin, ripping the rod asunder faster than it regenerate. Beating it back, tamping it down, containing it, sealing it. Do you have to make those sounds? She looked up to find his face gone red, red as her hair. It's kinda distracting. Forgive me. Aw. Another moan escaped her as her head tilted back. I can't stop. It was as if he were bringing back every sensation she'd ever lost all at once, every feeling that had been dulled and blunted by the rot. In her fevered state, it proved too much. Far, far too much. She tried to endure, to keep her self-consciousness as that strange red energy hammered its way into her, but she just couldn't. She hit her breaking point and plummeted over the edge with a sharp cry. Utter sensory overload, complete and total. Millicent couldn't take it any longer. Shamefully, she passed out before Naruto could finish mending her body. And everything changed. Does she still slumber? Looks like it. Let me check. At Greyrol's prodding, Naruto crept over to Millicent where she lay against Torrent's saddlebags. She dozed on, blissfully unaware of his presence. He pressed a finger into the slumbering woman's pale cheek. The redhead made a tiny noise of protest and batted ineffectually at his hand to no avail. On a whim he jabbed her again, to which she wrinkled her nose with a whine, but didn't wake. Adorable. The thought didn't feel odd to him in the least. She looked more at peace now than she'd ever been. Good for her. She deserved some rest. If Torrent at all minded the extra weight, he wasn't complaining. Quite the contrary. He seemed rather content to canter about at a leisurely pace behind them, well away from the monsters of Caelid. A few sweet raisins had done wonders to settle his nerves amidst the giant beasts, and he'd been sure to ply Melina's friend with them since. It was the least he could do. He didn't know the first thing about horseback riding, but that was no reason not to make use of Torrent, no. Good boy, he murmured, stroking the horned horse's head. You're doing great. Let me know if she wakes up, eh? His faithful steed nosed his hand and snorted once. Naruto beamed. I'll take that as a yes. Greyrol made an irritated noise. She'd been sullen ever since he put her in the corner. Do all humans sleep this long? They do when they're exhausted. He glanced her way with a quelling look. Be nice. She's been out for an entire day now, the poor thing. Probably gonna be starving when she wakes up. That was putting it lightly. He'd managed to burn most of the rot, as Millicent called it, out her system. What traces remained wouldn't do her any lasting harm so long as he kept an eye on her. If her condition worsened again, he'd just have to repeat the process. Right? A cheeky little voice muttered in the back of his head, the process. Let's call it that. Definitely didn't do anything lewd. Her flushed face as she writhed in his lap, back arching, tiny cries escaping her lips. Gaw. Don't go there. Unbidden, his gaze sought Greyrol once more. You've been awfully quiet since yesterday. She looked away, folding both arms before her bosom. I have nothing to say. Not gonna call me a lech again. Her shoulders twitched. No, not even a knave. Nay, you really that afraid of me? He wriggled his fingers at her as Jiraiya had once done to him long ago. Or maybe it's my hands. She bared her fangs in turn. Keep thy plans to thyself. I need no healing. Oh, that was it. He bit down on the laughter that threatened to bubble up. It was just a joke, oi. An uncomfortable silence stretched between the two of them as they trudged deeper into the depths. No soldiers barred their path. No monsters emerged to devour them whole. It was almost enough to make a man hope, it was. But he knew better. He hadn't cleared out Caelid, he'd only beaten back the tide. The rot would return and birth more abominations. He'd fight them all with his clones. But how did one cure the land? For all his strength and skill, Naruto didn't know how. Healing a person was one thing, but this was half a continent. Millicent's rot had fought him every step of the way, doing the same with the land itself. Why did you do it? He blinked, nonplussed at Greyrol's sudden inquiry. Didn't quite catch that. You went to such lengths to help her, a perfect stranger. Those cat-like eyes glared at him beneath her bangs. You even risked infection with her rot. Naruto stood his ground and set his jaw, not liking her tone. What of it? Her eyes flashed. I would know why, Rotqueller. They got a blink out of him. Rot what now? Rotqueller, the mother of dragons repeated plainly. In my tongue it would mean, he who quells the rot. Once I could have dismissed as a fluke, but twice. She sniffed. You have a gift. That girl didn't have much time left. Her organs were breaking down. If not for thee, she'd be a puddle of scarlet rot by now. A shiver stole over him. Had he really cut it that close? I don't need a reason to help people. Her slitted eyes narrowed. You have no ulterior motives. None at all. You could leverage your aid over the female, make her your concubine. Your slave. She seems the sort to honor her debts, to the exclusion of all else. Most would use that against her. Why would I do that? Slim shoulders rose and fell in a shrug. It is the way of these lands. Always has been. Naruto clicked his tongue and swallowed his gorge. If you need a reason to help someone who's hurting, there's something wrong with ya. You're a noble sort. Like that general. Admirable but misguided. Her gaze flitted out to a castle in the distance, and the dunes of sand beyond. This world will eat you alive if you let it. Best harden yourself while you can, before it's too late. He grinned right back, all steely determination. It can try. It will not try. It will succeed. She yanked on Torrent's reins and the somberness of her tone stuck with him. The lands between has seen the death of many men like you. As he looked on, she began to count off the fingers of a pale hand. Godwin the Golden, General Radon, Niquella the Unalloyed, demigods all, greater than thee to be sure, and where did they end up? She snapped her fingers. Dead, ruined, vanished to parts unknown. But you. Her eyes held his over the fire. Paused, considered. Who are you really? Naruto didn't like those eyes. They saw too much. Just a normal guy. Nay, I think not, because you are not. She tilted her head to regard him further. Sniffed once. Frowned. You aren't from these lands. Another quick inhalation, tasting the air, or perhaps his scent. Naruto wasn't sure he liked either notion. There, I thought as much. Her lips pursed into a thin line. Thou art a demigod, then. I should have known. The arrogance of thy kind knows no bounds. Those words stung from some reason, like the buzzing of a dozen flies. Him, a god. Just the thought of it made him feel sour. He wasn't a god. Not by a long shot. No, anything but that. He had scraped and spat and snarled for everything he had. His strength was the product of hard work and little else. Besides, what kind of god let people like Neji and Obito die? If he were truly a god, he could have saved everyone in the Fourth Shinobi War. But hadn't, had he? No. He shook his head slowly, bangs swaying. And no god. You are a demigod. Greyrol's level gaze met his own across the flames. No hint of that flustered dragon here. Her calm was ice cold, colder than one of Haku's jutsu. Not one of Marika's or Radagon's whelps, but a demigod nonetheless. I can see it now. Thou art descended from one, thy blood diluted perhaps, but no less potent. You hold the spark of divinity within you. Thy kind comes from greatness. Is she talking about Asura, or Old Man Sage? Could be. Kurama creaked on eye open within his mind. We know you're a distant descendant of them. Technically speaking, given your feats. No, no, no. Don't you dare. You could be considered a demigod, too. Sorry, kid. Truth's the truth. Truth, he said. Naruto scoffed. Truth was in the eye of the beholder. He was no demigod. In his mind, he never would be. Yet for all your strength, Greyrol went on in spite of his sulking, you cannot save everyone, let alone this rotten land. The rot you see before you hails from a goddess, not unlike Marika. She will not be so easily bested. Doesn't mean I won't try. Somebody's gotta stop it. Queen Marika, perhaps. Another shrug was his reward. She hasn't been seen for an age. She's likely dead. Her mouth curled in a bit of draconic derision. Or perhaps she fled these lands once they fell to ruin. Those of the Newman line have ever been cowards and cravens. She and her children, with few exceptions, had proven themselves the same. The ring on Naruto's finger pricked him most painfully. Oh, blasted thing. You say that like you know, you know. Come, let us speak of the past a while. Folding both legs beneath her, Greyrol did just that, forcing him to do the same or leave her behind. What do you know of this land's history? His brow furrowed. Less than I should. Understandable. A pale hand pushed a ringlet of pear hair from her eyes. You are not from this realm. She turned head toward the ruined remnants of a tree and spat, setting it ablaze to provide them some meager warmth. Allow me to summarize for your sake, then. Those bewitching orbs swung back to him, held him, as her voice dipped lower. In the time before the Elden Ring and the Erdtree, Tiwa was a different age. An age of giants, of beasts, of dragons. He listened, rapt with attention as Greyrol wove her tale. Then came Marika and her precious golden order. Venom crept into the story, tainting it. They usurped Lord Placidusax, drove the dragons away, and slew the giants. And for what? She turned her head and spat. Look what has become of them now. Such is the folly of mankind. Right? Because she wasn't biased about this at all. You feel strongly about this, huh? Placidusax was akin to my ancestor. She pulled a face. In your terms, he would be my great-great-great-grandfather. Under his reign, the age of dragons was a blessed one. I remember it well. A time where strength ruled, where death was not fettered by small-minded souls. A rare bite of longing gnawed at her words, her gaze gone wistful as she turned an eye to the sky. Might made right in those days. None of this endless dickering about that thy kind seemed to favor so. You would have fared well in such an age. Maybe. Naruto found he disagreed. You're saying the strong ruled, but what happened to the weak? The silence proved telling. Almost damnably so. Doesn't sound like an era I'd enjoy. Fair. Concern flashed across her face as she mistook his tone for something else. You're tired. I did not intend to keep you. She stood sharply, stiffly, stretching her limbs. Enough of my strength has returned, and he knew the lie at once. We shall go our separate ways tomorrow. So soon. Indeed. Was that a flicker of hesitation he felt just now? Surely it was his imagination. I have responsibilities to which I must attend. Naruto blew out a sigh. He'd thought he would have been happy to be rid of this grumpy dragon girl. Not long ago, he might have, but he'd seen a different side of her. It was starting to grow on him. She might be wild and flighty, but there was wisdom beneath the anger and arrogance, a tired soul that he couldn't help but empathize with. Now if only she'd stop being so damn grumpy. His sixth sense shrilled a warning as something approached their campfire. Hey, boss. A familiar voice, one of his clones, called out to him as the figure stepped into view. We might have a problem. Scree. A piercing screech split the air from the main road. Naruto craned his neck back. Do I want to know what that was? Greyroll's head whipped around, eyes wide as dinner plates. That can't be. Millicent whimpered wordlessly in her deep sleep. It almost sounded like an apology. Rot. His wings ached. His scales screamed. Even his very breath was fouled. He had only one recourse for his torment, and so he screamed. My baby. How is that a child? It was another dragon, of course. Naruto nearly did a double take as he beheld the braying beast in the distance. Even from here he could see the dragon wasn't well. Patches of ghastly white limbed its already pale body, further blighting what he could only assume was scarlet rot. Far smaller than Greyroll's to be sure, but no less dangerous. As he looked on it, shrieked at a twisted dog that had come too close to its hideaway. The hound vanished in a cloud of rot and succumbed instantly. What remained was snapped up by the dragon's jaws and devoured post-haste. Kurama made a squelching noise. Well, that's unsanitary. Naruto's clone scratched the back of its head. We kinda stumbled onto him and woke him up. He's been rampaging ever since. Rampage was a tame word. The dragon was biting rocks now. Greyroll had a far less pleasant reaction. That is Ekiz's, she explained hastily as they gazed upon the rotten creature. One of mine children. The youngest. A naked longing lurked in her voice. I did not know he suffered so. Her eyes all but snapped to his. You, she swallowed on her pride, nearly choked on it, then mastered herself. You will help him, won't you, Rotqueller? That's what you do. Help people. Naruto's brow rocketed into his hair. My, how quickly the tables had turned. Was it wrong that he felt just a little smug now? Just a bit. Thought you didn't want me doing that. He planted his feet. You just said so. Greyroll whined and took a moment to comport herself. He is my kin. He suffers. Surely you won't leave him like this. A golden eyebrow climbed higher. She squirmed like a naughty child under his gaze. You sure that's a he? Leave it to the clone to speak his mind. Don't think the boss can handle many more dragon girls, not if they're anything like you. Greyroll smacked the clone in the stomach and dispelled it. He cannot change his shape. She slashed clawed fingers through the smoke as the haze faded. Such is a skill gained over a great many years. Years he doesn't have, will not have, if you don't do something. Kurama, don't look at me. If you want to wrestle with a dragon, that's your business. Help my son, I beg of thee. Before he could think to stop her, Greyroll prostrated herself before him, physically kneeling and all but pressing her face into the rot-ruined earth. I'll give you whatever you want. My mind, my body, please. I'll bear your children. Whatever you desire. Oi, you're taking this way too far. Get up. Come on, up. Stand up, damn it. You're embarrassing me. Greyroll didn't budge. Not an inch. She only made a pitiful noise. It sounded like a sob. How could he ignore emotions like that? She was just too damn honest. I was already gonna help, geez. Don't beg. Naruto stalked down the rise. Ekiz swirled as a shadow fell over his bulk. Rotted though he was, the dragon's instincts remained. Intruder, trespasser, rip and tear, bit and scream, kill and maddened eyes looked up, gazed into the peerless golden slits of a furious fox. Be a good boy and hold still or else. The dragon whimpered. MELINA found them the next morning. Naruto sensed the maiden before he saw her, felt her coming as he picked at the dying embers of their campsite. In truth, he was amazed it had taken her this long at all. He'd half expected MELINA to hunt him down like a stag, drag his sorry hide back to the round table, and give him a telling off besides. But no, this time her arrival proved a silent one. Wholly absent of the previous pomp and circumstance she'd used to get his attention that fateful day. Hey, he pushed himself up off his haunches, dusted off his tattered trousers, and turned to face her. Long time no see. A suit of armor smacked into his chest. Naruto caught it with both hands, then frowned once he realized exactly what he was holding. He, recognizing the draconic scales at once, they were the same color as the carcass he'd hauled to the round table only a few days ago. Light armor, drake scale, a bright burgundy shade fitted with amber pauldrons and greaves tapering off into intricate metalwork he had no hope of describing. And so he didn't bother. Never in his life had he worn armor, but this ... he didn't have words. Master Hugh finished it just this morning. He knew at once by her words that MELINA was terribly cross with him, or maybe that was her index finger currently digging into his ribcage. I'll not have you wandering about the lands between looking like some wastrel. Hirama offered a low whistle. If this is what he can do with subpar materials ... well, I wonder what else he's capable of. Naruto cradled his prize close to his chest. That your way of saying you missed me? MELINA's face closed down at once. No, her emotions said otherwise. Awa, you did miss me. Wow. His laughter peaked into a yelp when she kicked his shin. Alright. Thanks for the armor. I'll give Hugh my regards when I get back. Naruto let it be, but paused just short of donning it. A quick glance confirmed no one save MELINA was looking his way. Not yet. That could soon change. Grayrol might not appreciate him wearing armor like this. Could be one of her kids. She might even take offense. It wouldn't stop him, of course, but still. 'Tis all one and the same to me. He heard her voice rise near the fire. That armor is yours by right of conquest. Besides, that's not one of mine. The blonde released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Great. I'll put it on right away. Looks easy enough. MELINA made a garbled noise and looked away as he doffed his ruined clothing. Naruto kept an eye on her all the while. Her gaze traveled to Millicent's prone form, sprawled sleepily atop a crude bed fashioned from Torrent's saddlebags. Her eyes traveled yet further and alighted upon the restored Ekisks, slumbering peacefully not a yard away from the spectral steed itself. Her right eye began to twitch. By the time it settled upon Grayrol, gnawing happily on a haunch of meat, MELINA looked like she was about to have a stroke. No shortage of companions, as ever. She clicked her tongue. I don't know why I'm surprised. You truly are an odd sort. To be fair, I kinda stumbled into them. Truly, she almost looked back, flushed, then thought better of it. You have the devil's own luck, tarnished. Nah, he stumbled, then stomped his way into a boot. The fit was perfect. Hugh knew his stuff. I'm just a simple man, making my way in the world. That, or a fool. Grayrol had held her tongue for the last minute or so, staring overlong at MELINA. No longer. You overreach yourself, kindling maiden. Now she granted her a small, subtle smile. Whatever would your mother say? MELINA's face drained of all color. How do you? My eyes see much. The mother of dragons made a show of digging a bit of dirt out her nails. It is allowed to me by Lord Placidusax. Naruto quirked a brow. There was something about that word. Kindling. MELINA pivoted so quickly she damn near blurred. And nothing to concern yourself with. Why was she panicking? Something had her spooked, but what? Dunno, sounds pretty important to me. Forget what's thou heard. Her good eye flashed. Forget? Had he heard those words somewhere before? She spoke just a bit too quickly for his liking, her voice breaking on the last word. He could have pressed her for details, pushed the envelope further. He was well within his rights, easily within his power, too. MELINA could hardly stop him if he tried to wring answers out of her. And yet something in her pleading expression held him back. Pressing her now might lead to something he wouldn't be able to take back. Fine. With a weary sigh relented. Look, if I worried, yeah, I'm sorry. He laid a hand on his shoulder. But I've got work to do here. I am aware. 'Tis why I have come. She pounced on his words, setting another alarm wailing in the back of his head. There is a great rune nearby, a powerful one at that. Stepping back but a little, she tugged herself from his grasp. But her eye never left his. Not once. I thought you might wish to seek it. Clever girl. Naruto perked up regardless. Is that so? Indeed. The maiden managed a smile. T would be better to have it in your possession. Would it not? Alright, even he could see through MELINA's machinations here. She was clearly trying to push him after this raid on Fellow, urging him on to another great rune. But why? What interest did she have in collecting them? It didn't make a lick if she intended to use them. No, there wasn't even the slightest hint of greed or avarice about her. She didn't seem to have any desire for such. So why? Does it matter? Our goals align for now. Grayrol clicked her tongue, drawing him back to the present. Do not try to manipulate him, kindling woman. It won't end well for you. I have no desire to manipulate him. MELINA drew herself upright with a huff. We have an accord. Nothing more. Enough. Speak plainly, or I will plainly separate thine head from thy shoulders. Naruto coughed into a fist. Well, that's one way to motivate her. MELINA ducked her head, swallowed once, then nodded. When next she spoke her voice was terribly soft. The rune is held by General Radon. Millicent was awake. Naruto noticed at once, if only because he'd been keeping an eye on her as they neared the castle. He wasn't out of distrust, but rather concern. For reasons he couldn't quite comprehend, MELINA didn't seem much fond of the once rotten girl. Indeed, she went well out of her way to avoid any and all mention of their resident redhead. Almost as if she knew her, wouldn't even walk near her at that. He sensed a story lurking there, but now wasn't the time for such things. Please, water. Definitely thoughts for later, because once Millicent stirred atop Torrance and began begging for a drink, he couldn't help himself. He hastened to her side, canteen in hand, even gave her what remained of his field rations to chase down the lukewarm liquid as best he could. She ate sparingly, not once protesting, even when he helped her out the saddle and lowered her to the dirt. No surprise there. Poor thing must have been exhausted. Not so exhausted to ignore him, however. The second he set her down, she raised her gaze, golden eyes pinning him. You quelled the scarlet rot, more or less. Naruto quirked a brow. Good afternoon to you, too. When the recovering redhead sputtered to that effect, he craned his neck back, searching for another maiden. Hey, MELINA, any chance you could get me a... She was already gone, vanishing back into the ether from whence she'd come. He clicked his tongue and glared at the fading motes of light. Sheesh, who put a bee in her bonnet? She's awake, then. Greyroll made a tutting noise behind him. Good, I shall scout ahead and inspect this fortress while she gets her bearings. A rueful chuckle escaped him. Pretty sure MELINA called it a castle. She shrugged. 'Tis all one and the same to me. And if the gate ain't open... Her eyes flashed, cat-like slits narrowing in draconic glee. Then I shall knock it down. Come X, let them have their moment. Having said her piece, the mother of dragons sashayed off, leaving her looming son to lumber after her apace. X paused a moment to regard Millicent with a giant eye. Abruptly it leaned forward and gave her a soft nudge with its snout. Soft for a dragon, that is. Millicent squeaked and nearly fell over. Naruto barked a laugh and kept her upright. Don't mind him. He's a friendly fellow once you get to know him. This is friendly. Sure is. He ran a hand over the young dragon's mending scales, then gave it a nudging, sending the massive beast stomping after its mother. See, he's a good boy. I beg you forgiveness. Millicent's face flushed at the last as it plodded away. My apologies for fainting before I could thank you. It's just as you said. The rotted has ceased to writhe. She reached up to grip her restored arm, seemed shocked to remember it was still there, then comported herself enough to continue. I may not understand it, but all the voices in my head are silent. Even the nightmares have abated. A fresh spot of color hit her cheeks and SH ducked her head anew. I slept like a babe, I'll say. A laugh burst from his lips. You were out for a while. Once again, her pale visage darkened with color. 1,000 apologies. Don't be embarrassed, it's fine. He patted her head without thinking, heedless of the curious noise she made. How are you feeling? Better? She frowned but a little when his palm pulled away. Though I can scarcely believe it, I can move as I please. She rubbed her wrist again, doubtless to make certain it was still there. It is all thanks to you. Was that adoration in her eyes? Naruto wasn't sure how to feel about that. The young warrior clearly respected his efforts, but he still couldn't bring himself to look her in the eye and meet the awe there. It wasn't as if he'd done anything particularly noteworthy. Anybody would have done the same. No. She shook her head, red locks swaying. You saved me. I will not forget that, so long as I live. She frowned when several strands of hair tickled her nose. Could you perhaps? Sure. With deft movements and a bit of cord, he helped her bind her hair back into a loose bun. My thanks. With her crimson locks out of the way, she looked even more human than before. I'll never be able to repay you at this rate. No problem. Just be careful and try to avoid any sudden moves. He almost didn't want to say it, but he had to warn her all the same. I'm not sure if I got all that crap out. Millicent gasped and glared at her arm as though it had betrayed her. For a wild moment she looked as though she might cut it off again. The rot still remains within me. Even now. Only a little. He made a pinching motion with his thumb and forefinger to reassure her. If it comes back, I'll wipe it out, same as before. Her face lit up, and not for the reasons one might expect. Oh, she squirmed beneath his gaze, knees twisting in thinly veiled agitation. I see ... so you'll do that again. Naruto sputtered at the memory. If I have to. Millicent didn't make a sound. Her flustered expression spoke for her. Silence reigned anew. Surprisingly, it was the redhead who finally usurped it. There is no way I could ever truly repay you, but a hand dipped into the pouch at her side. I would like you to have this by way of thanks. Out came her hand, clutching a golden medallion in her palm. A mere trifle it might be, but it would mean the world to me if you were to take it. Trembling fingers pushed it into his own. Consider it a token of my appreciation. On a whim, Naruto reached for it. Just holding it made him feel stronger. Strength he didn't necessarily need. What was the point in having more power? Without so much as a second thought, he pushed it back into her hands. You keep it. Millicent flinched. I beg your pardon. You need it more than me. His fingers closed around hers, forcing her to hold fast to the medallion. I'm tough enough without it. She tried to give it to him still, but he wouldn't have. I really don't need. Yes, you do. He stepped back and crossed both arms before his armored chest to rebuff her attempts entirely. You're still recovering, and I ain't gonna take away something that will help you. A grimace stole over his face as he remembered just where they were headed today. You'll probably need it in the days ahead. That spurred a different reaction in the recovering redhead. You sound as if you're marching to your death. Her lips pursed into a thin line when he didn't deny the possibility. Just who do you intend to face here? Naruto told her in no uncertain terms. Why not? He gained nothing from refraining and everything for being honest. Unfortunately, said honesty immediately sent Millicent spiraling down into a right and proper panic. You wish to fight General Radon. Something sparked in those rotten golden eyes. Alone? Probably not if Greyroll has anything to say about it. But I will if I gotta. Millicent climbed unsteadily to her feet. Allow me to aid you, then. Yeah, no. He shook his head. You just woke up and all. Her eyes met his. I will aid you. Don't discard me, her expression seemed to say. Don't cast me aside. Let me be of use to you. Please, I can't bear it. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose. Pushy redheads. Kurama was of no help at all whatsoever here. He wanted nothing to do with this and thus chose to stay silent, which in turn left the onus of choice with him. He could hardly afford to turn Millicent out into the wilds as she was now. She might catch the rot a second time and then where would he be? No, he couldn't turn her away. She'd probably follow him in any case. She seemed the sort for it. He stepped to her and grabbed her by the shoulder, sending another pulse of chakra through her body to strengthen her further. Millicent jumped with a yelp, one that was overshadowed by his words. Fine, you win, but stay close. I mean it. She ducked her head a touch and nodded. As my lord wills. Lord? Naruto poked himself in the chest. Me, that is what you are. The fervent belief in her words, the gleam in her eyes, startled him more than anything else he'd seen in this world. Only a lord would go so far as to help a perfect stranger, let alone convince an eclectic band of such as this to work together in pursuit of a common goal. And you bear a great rune, do you not? He touched a hand to his chest, where Godric's rune even now pulsed with life. Well, you're not wrong on that front. Do you perhaps have a weapon I could use? She pressed her advantage before he could think to challenge her other account. I would prefer a longsword or a katana if you have such. Didn't he have one of those? Naruto turned, regarding the bundle on Torrent's back. He'd scrounged through a few of the battlefields they'd passed, leaving his steed's saddlebags full to bursting. She didn't seem the sort for a greatsword, and a short sword probably wouldn't be enough for someone like her. Gimme a sec. It was the work of moments to find something that would suit her. He'd stumbled upon it by chance when some maniac attacked him near a cave. If it had a name, he didn't know it. He pressed a slender katana into her hands. Millicent accepted it, unsheathed the blade, and cut a quick slice through the air. A blade of light burst forth to annihilate a nearby boulder with ease, leaving its severed halves to slide apart and crash down into the rot-ridden dirt. Naruto blinked. Curious, she sheathed it again and repeated the process twice more, producing an arc of blue transience each time. This is Moonveil, she whispered quietly, sheathing it for the final time. An ancient glintstone blade forged by a Celian sorcerer in times long past. Where did you find this? Naruto shrugged. By chance. Her gaze met his. No one's that lucky. Maybe I am. He offered a self-same smile. Dunno what to tell ya. This is a fine blade. I gladly accept it. Only, abruptly, she flushed anew. Would you mind averting your eyes for a moment? Now what was she up to? Still, he sensed no ill intent and complied, presenting his left side to her as he looked away. All right, there. Why do you want me to do this? Something warm, soft, and infinitely yielding touched his right cheek. Little more than a feather's brush, a lingering touch, it nevertheless startled him all the same. When he looked back, he found Millicent kneeling hastily before him, head bowed, one fist pressed against her bosom, eyes fixed firmly on the road underfoot. Kurama perked up. Would you look at that? I've decided that I would rather trust you than simply continuing to spoil from within. Millicent's words were faint, almost a whisper, cheeks burning brighter than her hair. I had expected to die, to simply rot away, to be little more than a footnote in history. You changed that. And yet, though it shames me, I fear I must ask another boon of you. Her eyes met his, damp with unshed tears. Please, I beg of thee, take me into your service. Naruto's brow shot into his hair. Wanna run that by me again? I wish to aid you in your quest to become Elden Lord. The former amputee spoke quickly, hastily, even nearly tripping over herself in her haste to explain for fear of him denying her. Let me be your sword, your shield, your shadow in all things. As he looked on aghast, Millicent planted that fist into the dirt and bowed her head anew. I would protect you from all those that would do thee harm. Sullied though I am, I promise to uphold your vows, your morals, all that you are. And someday, this she added in a voice so faint even he had to strain to hear it, those that come after you. Oh. Naruto's brain fizzled out when she didn't finish that sentence. How did one respond to a proposition like this? No, how could you respond? Help, please. Not a chance. Kurama snickered, grinning from ear to ear. You're on your own here. Have fun. His right eye began to twitch. Stop that. And so he spat out the first thing that came to mind. You're not sullied at all. Stand up. You can help me if you want, but don't go throwing yourself in the dirt. Her head rose tentatively. Will you accept my into your service? She wasn't going to get up until he said yes. Naruto just knew it. What did Shikamaru always say? Such a drag. Yes, sure, fine. He looked away, palming his face to hide burning cheeks. Now get up. Come on. You're embarrassing me. He felt a fierce flare of joy from the redhead as she climbed to her feet, one so powerful it threatened to take his breath away. For a singular moment she shone to his senses because of that singular emotion. She caught it and tamped it down quickly, composing herself, but he couldn't forget what he'd seen. Dear girl, his mind bleated. Must protect. Then my sword is yours. Millicent straightened with a smile, all but glowing with pride. I promise, you shan't regret this. Although, she took a small, shy step toward him, into his personal space, and touched a hand to one breast. I wonder what this feeling is. I feel oddly warm. Naruto's heart leaped into his throat. She was close. Too close, bring with her the scent of herbs. It was not an unpleasant aroma. A triumphant shout shook the world, followed by a distant plume of dust. Millicent blinked. Once, twice, thrice now. Whatever was that? He heaved a sigh, almost disappointed by the distraction. Greyrol found a troll. Champions welcome. Of all the greetings Naruto had expected in the courtyard, those were not among them. Greyrol had been true to her word. By the time they'd caught up, the gate guard lay dead and the castle gates were ripped asunder to grant them passage. Well, most of them. Lacking a human form, X was forced to wait outside while they conducted their business within. He'd make a fine guard if anyone tried to creep up on their flank. Even so, no such ambush was forthcoming, for none barred their entry. The stars have aligned. Now they knew why, as a man's voice boomed out as they entered the plaza. The festival is nigh. Sure enough, his keen eyes spotted a masked man hoisting a flamberge high atop one of the ramparts well above them. His very voice brimmed with gusto. General Radon, mightiest demigod of the Shattering, awaits you. Millicent tilted her head to regard the bevy of warriors awaiting them within, some spectral, others mercifully solid. Seems a strange place to hold a festival. 'Tis a human right. Greyrol groused, lips pursed in a thin line as she glared at a giant jar. Thy kind has always been known for such foppery and finery. We dragons celebrate in a different fashion. Naruto couldn't help but quirk a brow at that. How so? Her hip brushed his in a telling fashion. Perhaps I shall show thee sometime. Millicent bridled in the corner of his eye, but said nothing. He knew she'd have words for her later. Mercifully, MELINA manifested between them they could snap at one another. You should see the festivals in the capital, dragon. The bite in her words had him drawing back. They would put your petty rituals to shame. Greyrol glared golden daggers at her, but with her ire thus diverted, Millicent took her chance and stuck to his side. Champions prepare for battle. Once more, the Castellan's voice rang out above them, diverting their attention for the umpteenth time. Defeat the general, claim glory and grab that great rune. His words peaked low with fervor bordering on mania now as he addressed the scattered souls standing before them. Such is our celebration of war, the Radon Festival. Naruto scratched the back of his head, feeling more than a little chagrined. Yes, we've got competition. Understatement of the century, there. He counted nearly a dozen stalwart men and women assembled in the plaza. A man wearing what he thought was a wolf's mask, a giant jar, a big brute in armor, a maiden clad in thin cloth. The list went on and on. He could have sworn he saw a samurai among them too. But surely that wasn't possible. Why would one of Mifyun's people be here? Never mind that. How many people were after this great rune? The low whinny of a horse cut through his thoughts. Naruto pivoted toward it, only to find himself somewhat caught out when he failed to find the source. That noise hadn't come from Torrent. The spectral steed was enjoying a well-earned rest outside with X. And besides, this sounded bigger, much bigger. Now who did he know that rode a giant horse? An answer smacked him upside the head. In the same instant, a long shadow fell over him from on high. A familiar shadow, one he knew all too well. MELINA manifested not a stone's throw away. head tilted a fraction of an inch. "Ah," was her sole exclamation. T-wowed seemed she caught up. That was Naruto's only warning. Someone crashed down into the plaza directly behind him, startling every champion in the plaza. Dust kicked up and he flung up an arm against it as his hood was blasted back. Squinting into the haze, he beheld a mighty steed, and a mightier shape even now clambering off its back. Dull gold armor glimmered in the light of the Erdtree, contrasting harshly against the crimson sky of Caelid. A familiar grunt had his hackles rising. Then she was upon him. He barked out a laugh, knowing what was coming. "Trish, don't you dare." Too little, too late. The last word was only just leaving his mouth when a golden arm got hold of his ankle. Not a heartbeat later, he found hoisted himself into the air, all but dangled upside down like a child's toy. Blue eyes fluttered in a brief blink, gazing into that wrathful helm and the scowling face within. "Hey," he managed a Cheshire grin. "Mind putting me down?" The tree sentinel poked him again, checking him over for wounds. Hey. He laughed. "Not in front of my friends." "Oh, I missed you, too. Did you really ride all the way out here?" "She must have." MELINA confirmed his suspicions as she reappeared only a stone's throw away, looking faintly bemused by his plight. "I lacked the strength to bring her with me." The tree sentinel made a decidedly unimpressed noise at that and waffled a golden hand in the Madian's general vicinity. For her part, she paid her little heed. Naruto winced at the fire there. "Look, I really am sorry, but I didn't think I'd get yoinked back in the round table, you know." Greyroll tilted her head. "T would seem you don't lack for interesting company. However did you tame her?" "Bit of a long story there, and I didn't tame anyone." "Then how did she interfere in your service?" Millicent was giving the sentinel a rather odd look as well, all the while gripping her restored wrist. Leave it to her to focus on that. Another thought occurred to him as he dangled there. Her arm. "Hey, that's right. I can heal ya now. Almost forgot." Slipping out of the Trish's grasp, he caught himself in a crouch and took a step forward, moving well into her personal space. "Just take your helmet off and I can fix you right up." "NeonZangetsu." The tree sentinel made a noise that couldn't be anything other than a denial. A golden gauntlet slapped his chest, forcing him back a piece. "What the heck?" When she shook her head, setting the plume atop her helm swaying, understanding dawned. "You don't want me to." She made a less than pleasant gesture across her throat, prompting a frown from him. "Oi, I still can't understand you." With a long-suffering sigh, the sentinel snatched a stray dagger off a nearby table. Dragging its rusty edge, she used it to carve words into the dirt at their feet. "My penance. Don't waste your strength on me. Not worthy." Indignation sparked in his soul. "Screw that. I've got plenty of chakra left. Now off with your helmet." Trish shook her head anew, for all that good it did her. A quick step and a hop and he had hold of her helm. A twist of his wrists tore it free, revealing her wide eyes to the world. More than a few champions winced when they beheld her ruined visage. Millicent hissed. Greyroll actually made a rare noise of sympathy as she saw her scars. Even as she did, the tree sentinel slammed back, furiously shaking her head. "It's not gonna hurt, I swear." Naruto stepped after her. "Here, just hold still." MELINA laid a hand on his wrist. "Now is not the time. Surely she has a reason for resisting you so. Perhaps you should wait until after the battle." Naruto nearly protested until he saw the look on Trish's face. Although she loomed over the lot of them, she suddenly looked fit to bolt. No, she was afraid. Terrified. Not of him, but something else. What, then? What had her so spooked that she wouldn't accept healing? In the end, he chose to heed MELINA's advice. Just this once, he'd seek the Sentinel's secrets after Radon was dealt with. Here, he tossed her helm back and stalked up the steps. "I'll be having words with you when this is over. Stay put, you know. I'll be right back." Without pausing to see her reaction, he left the lot of them behind to have words with the Castellan. It was as much an excuse to get away from the look in her eyes as anything else. He couldn't bear to see Trish wearing an expression like that. Imagine his surprise then, when he found the man waiting for him atop the rampart. "Aha, it seems we have a gobsayer among us." Despite his aged mask, the man beneath it all sounded heartened as he turned to meet him. "Come to grab another great rune, have you, young chum?" There was something almost merry in that affable voice that both made him lower his guard and tense in the same instant. "You know me. I know of you, rather." The Castellan cackled merrily. "I didn't think the Slayer of Godric would grace us with his presence." Seemed word had gotten out after all. Why does everyone know about that? "Lad, you're the first tarnished to hold a great rune since Vike. May the stars smile upon his sorry soul." The aging warrior made a strange sign before his own chest, nodded, then jerked a gloved thumb toward Naruto, and the pulsing golden-green shard even now beating near his heart. "But I'm afraid you'll find no easy prey here." Godric was the runt of the litter, I know. He felt an old anger overtake him. Why speak ill of the dead? Whatever he'd once been, he was gone now. The others will be stronger, yada yada yada, I've heard it all F4. And you are. Call me Jaren, lad. Quick bow of that bearded mask. I imagine you have questions about the good general. I do. He certainly did. It was why he'd come up here in the first place. Who is Radon? What's he like? Was he another Godric? Another monster to be put down? He hoped not. Allow me to paint you the full picture. Jaren swung an arm out past him, towards the wailing dunes below, where monuments of blades and banners stood etched within. General Radon was, and still is, a mighty warrior, strongest demigod of his generation. Now, he is cursed ever to wander, eaten from the inside, by MELINA's scarlet rot. His wits are long gone. His voice dipped in rare melancholy, head hanging just a touch before he recovered himself. Now he gathers the corpses of former friends and foes alike, gorging on them like a dog howling at the sky. A baleful roar echoed from the dunes. Naruto swallowed despite himself. ... So he's lost his mind. Long ago. Jaren didn't even sound sad to say it anymore, just resigned. But now we must make merry, he righted himself as he looked on, for the time has come to give him his rest. Quick as a flash the castellan pivoted back to MELINA and the others below, hoisting his flamberge high once more. O gathering of champions, the revels begin, our celebration of war. His sword crashed down, splintering the wood beneath him with a sonorous crack. The Radon festival. Color me surprised. Didn't think the old coot would be that honorable. Go now, said Old Soul, straightened up. Speak with the others. Make your preparations. It will take a great man of you to stand even a slim chance against our commander. Naruto pivoted, stifling a second sigh of his own. Don't have to tell me twice. Jaren called out to him before he could take a single step. Boy, he stilled. Yeah, give him a good battle, won't you? Naruto reached up and tugged at his headband. I'll do my best. Alexander perked up the moment he saw them. How could he not? This was to be a festival of champions after all. And these were a sterling sort indeed. Nor was he the only one to take notice of them. Verylyyy was but a humble finger maiden. She didn't consider herself particularly strong compared to some of the heroes here, but she was well versed with incantations of the Golden Order and quick on her feet. Such was expected of her naturally, for she served the will of the two fingers, bringing their grace and guidance to all whom cared to listen. And one day, someday soon, she would share that strength with her tarnished. She still hadn't found him or her yet, but Verylyyy was certain she would eventually encounter her destined one. The two fingers had promised her, after all. Such was the guidance of grace. She just hadn't searched in the right places. Yes, that was it. Long had she scoured high and low, following rumors all about the lands between, hoping in vain. Until finally, she stumbled upon an odd man known as Celibus. Such a strange wizard that one, but he'd proven himself a relatively trustworthy sort thus far. T was he who took her in when she was starving. T was he who first told her about this festival. T was he who even offered her a potion to help her on her quest. She would have gladly taken him up on the ladder, but she did not wish to be indebted to him any further than she already was. And so she had kindly refused the tonic he offered and taken her leave with great thanks, promising to return if she failed to find her intended here. She must succeed here. She did not wish to impugn upon his generosity any longer. Surely she would find her tarnished in these grounds. T was a tournament of champions, after all, sure to attract tarnished far and wide. Doubtless some already had maidens of their own. But surely there was at least one here without, one person who could fulfill her purpose, make her feel complete. Come on, MELINA. The voice of a young man plucked her from her misery as surely as a bird would a worm. It'll be fine. T will not be fine. A woman snapped back. I'll not see you herring off again without a plan. Drawn by these words, the young finger maiden pivoted, seeking their source. Imagine her surprise then, when her eye fell upon a strapping young blonde being fussed over by not one, not two, but four women. Clad in amber drakescale armor, he stood apart from the rest not solely for that, but for his aura alone. Fair of face was he, with striking blue eyes and whiskered cheeks even now dimpled in a sunny smile. But what truly drew her attention was the great rune pulsing in his chest. As a finger maiden, Verylyyy recognized its make at once, for the wisdom of the fingers was always with her. T was the rune of Godric. There could be no doubt. She understood now. Like so many others, this one sought the rune of Radon. Verylyyy couldn't abide that. She needed that great rune. With one such as that, she could find her destined tarnished. The other shard bearers were out of reach, or otherwise beyond her meager means to find. But here, if she had help, here, with numbers on her side, she had her chance. Her best chance. Her last chance. Her only chance. The blonde blinked suddenly, regarding another competitor. That is a big dog. Half wolf, actually. The being retorted. He talks. Verylyyy almost found herself smiling despite herself as the two struck up a rapport. Was that the half-wolf blade, Shadow Tyranny? The two fingers might be pleased to learn of his location when next she visited the round table. Still, her eyes strayed to the woman near the blonde as the duo conversed. A dragonkin woman bickered with a redhead, while a towering woman in golden armor glared bloody daggers at a lass bearing one eye. Oddly enough, the other looked to have been sealed by something. The other was fixed firmly on the blonde. That last thought tore at her heartstrings. She had the look of a maiden, which meant the blonde wasn't the one. He'd no need of her. If he already had a maiden tending to his every need, he would not take a second. Rare was the sort who did such, and rarer still the blonde that persisted as two maidens fought over a single tarnished. And yet, Verylyyy turned her gaze inward. She could feel the strength of runes lingering about him, a great many of them. Hundreds, no, hundreds of thousands, untapped power just waiting to be unleashed at the right moment. Surely if he had a maiden, all those runes would have been turned to strength long ago. But he hadn't used any of them. Not a one. What, then, did that mean? A tiny, timid hope bloomed in Veryyy's heart. Did he not have a maiden after all? He looked her way suddenly, no doubt sensing her gaze. The moment their eyes, Verylyyy averted her own and managed a polite bow. He returned it with an awkward wave. By the time she looked up, he was distracted yet again. Thank the fingers for small mercies. She couldn't bring herself to speak to him. No, nay, not yet. She dare not approach. Not now, not when he was surrounded by so many. Certainly not with that giant jar trundling their way. To approach him now would only see her swept up with the others, one voice lost among many. But perhaps yes, after the battle she would try. If she lived. If Radon didn't slay her. So many ifs. She just had to survive. There he is. Naruto saw a giant shape across the dunes, a great hulking warrior that dwarfed them all. The distant figure of Radon moved with impossible speed. An arrow hurtled their way. Millicent yelped. Radon feasted. He bent low to the ground and gorged himself on another would-be champion, tearing great strips from their flesh with his teeth alone. His teeth scoured rotten flesh, managing little more than a few middling bites before he had his full. His meal secured, he reared back and howled at the sky. Kill and eat. Eat and kill. He killed and he ate. He ripped and tore. It was all he was. All he knew. All that he could do. Sometimes there were moments in which he despaired. Brief seconds of sanity that surfaced once every decade or so. Even now in his mad state, his body falling apart, his organs rotted, his instincts yet remained. His addled mind still clung to three precious tenets, even now. They anchored him. Must not eat Leonard. Leonard was horse. Horse was good boy. All he had left of his family. Hold back the stars. Do not let them fall. Never let them fall. And above all, fight, fight, so that he might end. So long as he held the stars back, the world would be safe. Someone had told him that once. A man with red hair. He no longer remembered who. There were monsters in the stars. Beasts that came from the void. Cruel creatures who loved not and knew only destruction. So long as he held the cosmos in check, all was well. But there was another Ryosen, wasn't there? And Rani. Rani would be safe. Rani. Who was Rani? He no longer knew. There. Movement in the dunes. The moment fizzled out and Radon riding himself, reaching for his great bow. A giant hand ripped three spears from his skewered back and took aim. T was a simple action. Gravity magic flared, forming a distant nebulae at the tip of his arrow as he drew the string back. Back yet further. His eyes saw much, even at this distance, chief among them a woman with stark red hair. The rot in him stirred at the sight, seething like the frenzied flame itself. Radon recalled a woman with such flaming locks. Rotted though he was, his body knew well the face of the one who had brought this blight upon him. MELINA, blade of Miquella, rotten, dishonorable witch who couldn't bear to take a loss. And now she was come again, come to mock him, taunt him, torment him. Her fault, all her fault. He loosed the arrow with hate in his heart. Straight and true did it fly, crossing the distance in an instant before they could hope to react. A cry of pain reached his ears. One down. He could see dark shapes racing across the sands toward him now. Radon roared a challenge at them. Something roared back. Radon. A man's voice ripped through the wailing dunes, a shockwave of sound tearing across heaps of broken weapons and moldering bones to reach him. And for the first time since the rot had come upon him, star-scoured Radon quivered. But not in fear. Nay, he shuddered for an altogether different reason. T was a brief momentary thing, but it gave his prey time enough to speak again. I came here to face a champion. His voice was fire and death, hope and light incarnate. I am still waiting. Come and get me, unless you're afraid. Radon's heart sang. Those words. A worthy foe. A good death. An end. At last. Long had he waited. The last broken scrap of his mind howled, and as he did, he heard the challenger howl back. Something stirred in him as he spurred Leonard forward with all due speed. Stowing his bow, he drew his blades and howled at the sky. A glorious battle. An end. That was all he wanted. Finish me, please. Oh. Naruto hissed furiously as he ripped the great arrow from his shoulder. It went unwillingly, worsening his wound, but he grit his teeth and forced it free fro his flesh. Blood spattered the sands, drawing a fair share of gasps fro his companions. He shut his ears to them. Not a small wound by any means or measure, but what choice did he have? If he hadn't shoved Millicent aside at the last moment there, that would be her skewered in the sands. He could take a hit like this and laugh it off. She couldn't. What was one more scar by comparison? Had to be him. He could tank things like this. He could live. My lord. That wound. At his flank, he was vaguely aware of Millicent fretting over him, his sword fingers running down the length of his arm. Bless her simple soul. He patted her shoulder with a smile and let her haul him upright. Truth be told, her help wasn't needed, but it was pivotal that she felt useful. If even a single arrow struck Millicent, she would die. She didn't have Trish's armor, nor did she possess Greyrol's draconic vitality. She couldn't vanish into the ether and hide like MELINA, either. I'm fine. Just gimme a second. Forcing chakra to the wound was easier than ever before. Almost effortless. Godric's rune had empowered every aspect of him, regeneration included. An injury like this would close in a few minutes, hardly enough to slow him down even if it did enrage his companions. Trish took one look at his wood, snarled, and leaped onto her mount. Greyrol raced barefoot into the dunes beside her. Most of the others followed their lead and charged in, seeking strength in numbers. Naruto alone lingered. You cannot heal him as you did the others. MELINA appeared at his side in a shower of blue light as the last of his wounds stitched itself shut. He's rotted, inside and out, and for far longer. She scowled at him. He was at the epicenter of the blast that ravaged Caelid. Whatever you're plotting, it won't work. Naruto lifted his chin in mulish defiance. He was sure it was writ across his face. Won't work, she said. Wouldn't know until he tried. But first he needed Radon's attention on him, and away from everyone else. There was only one way to do such. Time to put on an act to end all acts, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. Millicent saw the look in his eye and scowled. My lord, no. Don't you dare. Too late. Radon. Naruto stepped forward, spread his arms wide, voice echoing across the wailing dunes. I came here to face a champion. I am still waiting. Still grinning. He turned around, bent over, and slapped his flank. Come and get me, unless you're afraid. A moment of awful silence followed, and then, the world shook with an answering roar. Someone whistled behind him. Big brass balls on this one. Naruto never saw who it was. He was already bounding forward, fixed on the melee in the distance. Millicent pelted after him at his left, and a rustle of cloth told him MELINA was hovering near his right. He knew better than to tell her to step aside this time. She had done that for him once. Never again. The first blow decided the course of the battle. It also nearly killed Millicent. Naruto moved to intercept the moment Radon closed with her, only to find that there was no need or time for him to do anything. Much to his surprise, the redhead bounded forward and leaped into the air, leaving a giant blade to sweep harmlessly underfoot. The second came racing and hot on the heels of the first, only for her to kick off its edge with both feet, using the blackened blade as a springboard to further her leap. She hung in the air for a moment in blatant defiance of gravity. Parallel with his chest, her sword arm rose. Radon looked down. Millicent's blade swung up, sheathing Moonveil in an impossible arc, and then the blade flew free, and so did she. Radon roared in surprise as Millicent's weapon upon him in a storm of glowing azure blades, whirling and flowing as he'd only ever seen once before. All combat ceased as she single-handedly forced him back. The ring on Naruto's finger sang in blissful harmony, bringing two words to the forefront of his mind. Waterfowl dance. Whatever it was, it put Radon on the back leg. No, a quick glance confirmed didn't have feet. They'd long since rotted away at the ankles, leaving him to rely on his scrawny steed for locomotion. Locomotion he could not maintain as he staggered under the storm. Shoulders sagged, armor buckled beneath the onslaught of steel and blue light. Millicent didn't give him the chance to counter. She just kept moving, ripping into him as if she'd been born for this, created for nothing but this singular moment. But her stamina wasn't infinite. Radon was a demigod. She was not. Rumbling like thunder, he warded the blows away with one sword. The other rose. Naruto saw the counter coming in the same moment that Millicent finally faltered. Trish, the tree sentinel, stepped in seamlessly as the redhead fell to a knee and brandished her golden shield. Naruto stepped in behind her, swept Millicent up, and darted back. Those star-scoured greatswords descended and combat resumed. Trish ducked behind her shield, ready to weather the storm. And weather it she did. Her defenses held in the face of his fury, enduring not one, but 3 singular strikes that would have split a lesser warrior in half. Radon ignored those tearing at his flesh and raised both blades high, prepared to break her guard with an overhand smash only for both blades to smack into a pair of open palms. The mad demigod made a noise of confusion and glared down at the immutable barrier that had saved her life. Greyroll grinned up at him, exposing rows of razor-sharp teeth in a wild leer. Come, scales sprouted from her flesh. Face a dragon. She kicked outward, staggering him. From there it all dissolved into a mad melee of blows. Naruto made the mistake of parrying a greatsword. The impact alone nearly ripped his arm from its socket and forced him to punch up with the other. Clenched knuckles barreled into Radon's chin. His head snapped back, but still, he remained seated atop his horse and came at him again. A racing input paid to that, warping his armor to tear at his flesh, but still he didn't go down. And was with that horse. The sight nearly brought the blonde up short. How on earth could a giant like Radon ride such a scrawny steed without crushing it? His hesitation nearly cost him an arm. Even then he barely got his guard up time. The star-scoured greatsword swept down, seeking his head. Giant golden palms rose to meet them, not to deflect this time, but rather to meet the blades head-on as Greyroll had. Unlike her, he caught the blades and yanked them down, wielder and all. Radon and his mount crashed into the sand. When they tried to rise, he raised his fists and brought all his strength down on the general's back, using Kurama's paws as battering rams. He could hardly use his full form here, doing so would harm his allies. And there were many of them now, more than he could count. Here he heard Blade howl and saw the half-wolf pounce onto the general's thigh, driving his frozen greatsword deep. Radon roared in pain, but even as he sought to rip him apart, Greyroll rent the giant's chest with her claws, causing yet further blood loss. Millicent crouched backwards, steadied herself, then flew into a fresh flurry of blows that hammered the general's wounded back. MELINA landed atop his back and drove a dagger deep, only for the general to buck and hurtle her away. A certain jolly jar caught her, spun around, and flung the kindling maiden back into the fray with a mighty cry. Others joined in, raining down blows on the general from all sides, chipping away at his mighty vigor. They were wearing him down, slowly but surely. Now if they could just knock him down. And then the tempo changed. Radon shuddered to a stop atop his tiny, aging mount, gone still as stone. Naruto swore softly, not like the look of that one bit. What in the? A low growl seemed to rattle the dunes, no, the very air itself. Radon was still snarling when he leaped into the air. The world fell silent. Millicent looked left first. Naruto looked right, frowned, and then he remembered to look up. All right, where did he? Is that a meteor? Get up. His ears were ringing. No, that wasn't it. Everything was ringing. He couldn't remember the last time someone hit him from orbit. It hurt like hell. Naruto touched one hand to the side of his head, grimacing in pain as the skin there regrew. Why were his ears ringing? Why was everything blurry? Why couldn't he think straight? He could feel someone shaking his right shoulder, hear them shouting while the earth trembled underfoot. But it all felt so distant somehow. One fist lay buried in the sand, his body down on a single knee. Even the singular act of raising his head made him feel violently ill. Had to move. Had to get up. Had to. By the log he was going to be sick. Breathe. Your eardrums were ruptured by the blast. Any chance you could fix that? Kurama just did. A clap of thunder rang in his head, taking the nausea with it. Dimly he became aware of the world again as he climbed to his feet. He immediately wished he hadn't. He could hear Greyroll growling and Radon raging across the next dune, which suggested at least a few combatants had survived his landing. But then he saw them. He found Trish sprawled out in the dunes not a yard away, and her mangled shield not far from that. Her armor was caved in from a mighty blow and her helm knocked aside. By some miracle she still lived, but only just. MELINA was crouched beside her with a ruined leg, forcing a flask of crimson tears to the larger woman's lips. Drink, blast you. The sentinel planted a trembling fist in the ground and punched it, but acquiesced. Naruto nearly gagged as beheld the mangled joint of the kindling maiden's knee, the limb itself bent at an unnatural angle. How was she ignoring a wound like that? Would she heal from that? Could she heal? Not likely, not when she was using her flask on Trish. He stumbled her way and made to lay a hand on her knee, only for her to glare daggers at him. He still did despite her glare. He wouldn't forget the awful noise her leg made as it popped back into place. My injuries are of no concern, she gasped out, batting his hand away. Tend to your sword. She is in more need of your strength than I. Sword? The blonde paused as he realized they were missing someone. Wait, where was? Good to see you awake, a weak voice whispered behind him. My lord. He found their resident redhead propped against the very same mound of weapons he'd just risen from, clutching her right arm. What remained of it. The very same limb he'd restored, now reduced once more to a ragged stump at the shoulder and an ugly tear in her collarbone. Blood flowed freely from the wound, forming a scarlet puddle beneath her. Memories rushed back. The meteor. Wrong. Radon had been the meteor. He'd crashed down on them, a falling star, power bombing them from the upper atmosphere. She had shoved him aside at the last, saving his life. Incredulity dawned, rooting him where he stood. Why? The sword protects her lord. In any case, it's just a flesh wound. Her waxy complexion said otherwise. I've suffered worse. Her words untethered his legs, just like that found himself moving, slamming down onto his knees, pressing both hands to her gaping wound. Chakra surged out, wrapping the length of her shoulder. She didn't react to the mending energy in the least. She was just that far gone. He could feel her pulse fading, growing weaker, and with her weakness something deep inside her stirred, rising to the surface. The scarlet rot. He had suppressed it once before, but she'd not been this weak then. He could feel it in her now, an angry writhing tide, eager to bloom, to flower into new life. He shoved at it, and a ghastly, oily presence touched his mind. Why do you resist? A low contralto, a woman's voice, whispered in his ear, sweeter than poisoned honey. She already belongs to me. She is mine, just as her sisters are mine, as MELINA is mine, as this world will be mine. It reminded him of Kaguya, but worse. So much worse. Why struggle fruitlessly? He kept his eyes fixed on Millicent's slowly mending collarbone, watching the wound close to the exclusion of all else. A hand took him by the chin. Millicent's hand. He didn't want to look up, for fear of what he'd find there. He tried to resist and failed. She gazed back at him, her golden eyes a tainted pink on red, a coy smile tugging at her normally dour expression. It was a look he'd never seen her wear before. If anything, it helped him distance himself from her. Something was controlling her body, no, speaking through her very soul. Something not of this world. Scram, whatever you are. Shirama rallied before he could. He's already got one passenger. Mine business is not with you, creature. 'Tis with him. We need not be enemies. Her voice dipped lower still, running silken fingers over his spine as she turned her tainted eyes back to him. Be my champion, mine dear consort. He shivered a little as her forehead kissed his, lips brushing his ear. Free me from mine lake of rot, and I shall usher in a new cycle of rebirth for this decayed world. Together, our children shall devour the very. The ring on Naruto's finger erupted into searing brilliance, warping her words into a wail of pain. Begone. He is not yours to claim. Millicent withdrew with a start, her eyes gone gold once more. You forgive me, she rasped, leaning back against the rusted weapon. I don't know what came over me. I was not myself. That's putting it lightly. Naruto had an awful inkling. That she wasn't aware of it only confirmed his suspicions. That thing, whatever was inside her, it couldn't be set free. Greyrol's scream echoed across the wailing dunes. Radon roared back. She fell silent. They need you. Millicent's head lolled to the side. Leave me. Dread dawned and he shouted her down. Quiet, you. In that moment, Naruto felt like screaming himself. He shoved more chakra into her, and this time, she gasped. The rot receded with a snarl. He took that as a good sign. He couldn't regrow her arm in time. In his current state, he was struggling just to stop the bleeding and close the gaping wound. Every second he wasted was another in which someone might die. Even now, their survival wasn't a sure thing. Radon howled and another cry of pain pierced the air. Panic clouded his mind, tangling his already tattered thoughts into ugly red knots. Maybe send a swarm of shadow clone. But that would mean taking his hands off Millicent. And if he did that, she'd keep losing blood, and if she lost too much, she'd... Allow me. Someone knelt beside him. A gentle golden glow suffused Millicent's body. Naruto's head snapped to the side, taking in the newcomer at a glance. Except, she wasn't a newcomer at all. It was the woman from the plaza. The one in the robes who'd bowed to him back then. A faint golden sheen stemmed from her hands as she brought them forward against Millicent, brow writ with concentration. He felt something pushed against his chakra in that moment, strengthening his attempts at healing, doubling them up with a blessing. As he looked on, the wound finally closed, the blood within slowing to but a trickle. Well, well, seems someone has a gift. The stranger granted them a tiny, tremulous smile. He didn't even know her name. I'm no fighter, am lord, she warbled a little, flushing prettily under his gaze. But I can at least keep your companion stable while you fight. Hugh. Blade's body hurtled past them and crashed into Alexander, just now cresting the next rise. He heard the great jar crack as both brawlers went down. Credit where it was due, the half-wolf bounded upright and hurled himself back into the fray with nary a pause. His fellow did not. The jolly jar lay there, still as a stone, out cold. Warrior. Greyroll belted out a yelp. A little help. Go. Millicent nudged him with her good arm. I'll live. Stop him. Naruto grimaced. He had to, didn't he? One way or another, someone needed to put the general down. Greyroll and Blade might well be the ones to do end Radon if he let them be, but who was he to leave them to their fight? It hadn't been personal before. Now, after all the wounds his comrades had taken, an ember of anger kindled in his chest, righteous and powerful. Wincing at his wounds, he climbed to his feet. "I'll be right back." Millicent smiled at him. His heart skipped a beat, more so at her words. "Be safe." Naruto ran then, from her as much as the strange feeling in his chest. He wasn't ashamed to admit it. His mind was already elsewhere, locking down, focusing on the fight ahead. A quick step shot him over the dune, past a startled Blade, followed by that fellow with the great hammer, then the masked madman with 2 swords. He saw Radon first, a strange series of what could only be described as boulders looming over his shoulders as he howled at Greyroll. That had to be Greyroll. He scarcely recognized her, covered in blood as she was, hair matted, dress in tatters. In her desperation she had nearly reverted to her draconic self. Now she seemed some strange amalgamation caught between human and dragon. Even from here, the changes became apparent. Her human form stood proud and unbowed despite her wounds. Was it his imagination? Or had she grown? No, she looked to be a good head taller than he remembered. More than that, she was nearly half the general's size now, if not his equal in sheer tenacity. "I won't die here," she snarled, fangs flashing in the moonlight. "Not yet. Not to you." In that split second of inattention, Naruto stepped in. He whistled sharply. "Hey, big guy." Radon heard his challenge and rounded on him with a roar, brandishing his blades. Naruto let him raise them. They swung down in an overhead smash. One that became so much wind in his hair as he stepped into the good general's guard. Radon grunted in surprise, a grunt that became a snarl as he reached up and grabbed the man's wrists. The demigod tried to pull away, of course. Tried, as in, he did not succeed. "Sorry." Naruto apologized to him as much as the withered horse currently staring him the face. "But this is the end for you." The beast gave a low whinny and slammed against him, to no avail. He didn't budge. "It's all right," he whispered. "I'll give you a long rest after this." Golden hands began to squeeze, buckling first Raiden's gauntlets and then the wrists beneath. He kept squeezing, hardening his heart to the cries of pain that followed. That plucky steed drove itself at him again and again in spite of it all, determined to protect its master. All for naught. "Hirama, I've got him." A golden limb burst from his back and pinned the steed. It was the final straw. Radon's arms spasmed and lost hold of his greatswords at long last. They sheathed themselves in the sand at his feet, driven nearly to the hilts by their weight alone. How a man could carry those things, he'd no idea, let alone when they were enhanced with those rocky crag blades. Even then the general didn't give up. He reared back and brought his head smashing down in a vicious headbutt, all but flattening his poor mount against the sand to get at him. Stars flashed through his vision, but once more he held firm. Placid red orbs gazed into eyes of maddened gold, the gaze of a starving lion longing for an end. Still he searched for some sign of sanity within, some semblance of serenity. And against all odds, the general spoke. "Well, more roar really. MELINA. Was it the eyes?" "Had to be the eyes." "Sorry, ain't her. You never asked for this, did you?" He leaned his head against the general's and let his eyes drift shut. "Maybe we could have been friends, before all this." Radon tried to headbutt him again for it. This time he was ready for it. Still gripping the general's wrists, he released his mount, leaped up and drove a golden knee into the man's midsection. Radon doubled over. He didn't stop there. Abandoning his hold on the man's fractured wrists, he let momentum have its day. It carried him up and over and away, but not before he got a hold of the general's crimson mane. From there, gravity did the rest. With a cry of triumph he slammed him down to the dunes, momentarily stunning him. From there he pressed his marked palm to the giant demigod's forehead and focused. Golden chakra flowed forth, lulling them. Distantly he became aware of Greyroll and the other combatants approaching. She was grinning at him, looking like a goddess of the battlefield. He waved her down with a smile and returned his attention back to his patient. Only had one shot at this. "All right, big guy. If I healed a dragon, I can fix what in the blue hell is this?" He nearly recoiled what he found there. Radon's insides were gone. His internals were a literal mass of rot soup. Nothing more, nothing less. Of his organs, precious little remained. He'd never regrown organs before. Eyes and arms, yes, hell, he'd brought Guy back from the very brink of death after using the 8 gates. But even that was merely a matter of reversing the damage, spurring the body's natural defenses into overtime to heal great wounds and recover that which had been lost. How did you heal that which no longer existed? Without the rot, would he even be alive? Radon had been feasting on the rotten corpses of former friends and foes for centuries now. The rot had a hold on him unlike any other. Of those who came before him, he had precious little of his wits left, let alone his sanity in any meaningful capacity. Millicent and Greyroll had been infected to be sure, but not even poor X-Ix had fermented with this much poison. Radon had been at ground zero when MELINA unleashed the Scarlet Rot. Even boosted as he was by Godric's great rune, he didn't think he could fix this. Can't I? The realization rattled him. No, he rallied. I can fix this. I can do it this. I have to. He's not like Godric. He's a good guy. He deserves to live. Dragging his chakra out, he flung it at the ailing general in a web, wrapping him in golden light beneath his armor. The Rot realized what he was doing at once and clung on tenaciously, refusing to give an inch. He had to batter it back bit by bit, a craftsman chipping away at obsidian with a chisel. It was slow, murderous going. Someone shouted at him and tugged on his shoulder. He ignored them, torn between two now 3 tasks at once. He wasn't simply trying to push out the infection, but heal Radon's body and mind simultaneously. Without his organs, the good general would fall apart the moment he ripped the Rot out. It didn't help that the Star Scourge was fighting him every step of the way. He couldn't even blame Radon for that. In his heart of hearts, the general had nothing left to live for. As such, he longed only for an honorable death in battle, an end to his pain. This was not that. It was slow, agonizing, probably felt like torture. Only natural, he'd rail against it with every instinct he had. If only he could make him see. He was just trying to help. He didn't want to hurt him. Finish me, please. The world went white. Naruto closed his eyes against it. Kurama's voice pierced the veil, returning him to reality. You need to stop. This is beyond you. He's breaking free. Sweat beaded down his brow as he grit his teeth. I can still do this, damn it. Naruto, you may be able to heal his body, but you can't make a madman sane. I've almost got it. Just give me a few more minutes. And then Radon bucked under his palm. Kurama yanked him back. It saved his life. A massive fist shot up and struck them in the chest, fracturing 3 ribs to launch him into a dune. He kicked upright in an instant, but it was too late. The moment Radon moved, everyone went mad and fell upon him en masse. In that madness, someone struck true. Naruto was never sure who, only that they did. Radon flailed about himself with grasping hands, but not enough. He took wounds. Someone slashed out his right eye. An agonized cry pierced the air. The good general jerked upright, then stumbled on rotten legs. He fell forward, catching himself with both palms ... as his withered mount collapsed beneath him. Naruto swore in the same breath as Greyroll. Who did that? Divided by fool of a tarnished blade lowered his blade. They've done it now. Radon nudged his faithful steed once more, trying to spur him on. The poor beast slumped to the sands with an exhausted whine. A giant hand descended, cradling its exhausted body, nursing the grievous wound in its belly. Trembling fingers set it aside in the rot-ridden sands. He gave it another desperate nudge, making a pitiful noise. The withered beast managed to raise its head a fraction of a foot, then fell still. It did not move again. He lowered his head and sniffed once, sobbed softly. Leonard. His horse didn't move. Not thee please, not you, too. The stars sang a mournful dirge overhead. I think we've just made a terrible mistake. Leonard wouldn't move. Radon's rotten mind struggled to make sense of it all, to no avail. It didn't make a lick of sense. How had this happened? Why wouldn't his beloved steed move? Radon didn't know what to do. Not without his horse, without Leonard. What was he to do now? He wanted to die. He needed to die. A worthy death was all he sought. And yet, these monsters had slain his horse, all that he had left of his family. An answer came to him then. Kill them. Kill them all. Okay. Radon dragged himself upright and fell off his steed. On ruined legs did he right himself. Why? His neck craned back, a single golden eye gazing at the moon high above. Heavy hands reached up for it as though to grasp it, and failed. A mournful howl escaped him then, a wail of grief and despair, of a good man who had tried to do right and failed. A tortured wretch who had finally lost one too many. In his heart of hearts, Naruto heard his voice then. You were at my side all along all this time. And so the general spoke, slowly, haltingly, but words emerged nevertheless. My oldest friend. My dearest companion. A shiver shot down their spines. Taken from me. His head bent low as his helm fell away, leaving the flowing crimson mane of his hair to tumble down his back. Oh, Leonard, he rumbled, jaws parting, setting teeth to flesh. Lend me thy strength once more. Naruto turned his head away as Radon fed upon his horse like a starving dog. Devoured its corpse, marrow and flesh and bone, all. And as he fed, he healed. Radon pushed himself upright on rotting legs. Gravity magic flared beneath them, forming boots of hardened stone around his ankles. He stood tall, wounds closing, spears falling out his ruined back. His hands snapped open. Once more did the star-scourged great swords fly into his waiting palms, bathed in baleful light. Yet now there was a hint of something else to them. darker, tainted, rotten. You took the last of my family. Uncaring of his bloody visage, he rose. The only thing that still mattered to me. His voice gained strength as he spoke, spurred on by the pain of loss. You wretched tarnished. When the star scourge raised his gaze, there was a frightful glimmer in his eye. Rotten his body may well be, but a shard of his self remained awakened now, spurred on by the pain of loss. His ruined eye wept rot, trailing crimson tears as he raised his blades high. Star scourge Radon died in that instant. In his place, Radon the Rotten was born. Let it all rot, he rumbled. I care not anymore. Let the heavens quake, let the stars cry. Let this wretched world die. Lionel and Akina never saw the blow that slew them. 1 minute they stood there balking at the reinvigorated general. In the next, a star smashed down upon them, hurtling them back to their respective worlds in a shower of golden light. Trajoth survived by dint of his superior armor alone, yet even he found himself hammered down, unable to rise. Radon took full advantage and brought his blades crashing down. The severed halves of the Horn Knight's spirit crumbled into dust. With his passing, so too were their numbers cut in half. And then he turned to them. I will have each and every one of your heads. Now you've done it. Blade hefted his greatsword with a forlorn sigh. There's no reasoning with him now. Me. Greyroll hissed back at the wolf. Tiwa's not my blade that slew his steed. Blame the bloody swordsman for the deed. Radon chose his target and lunged with a bestial howl. Greyroll backpedaled. Naruto leaped forward himself, knowing he'd be too late. Radon struck. Blood spattered the sands. Those deadly star-scourged greatswords bit deep into the dirt as Greyroll flitted out of harm's way. She took flight, borne aloft now by a pair of towering wings. Black viscera spattered the sands, her shoulders even now bleeding from their sudden emergence. Silhouetted against the moon, she held up a clawed hand to beseech the heavens. Sparks danced at her fingertips, scarlet sparks. Enough. There was something off to her voice now as well, as if another, far greater presence were speaking through her. Ye dare make me exert myself, you mongrel. His sixth sense shrieked a warning well before Kurama balked. Back, now, I am Greyroll, mother of dragons, child of the great Lord Placidusax. Do you hear? Eyes wild, she cast her arm forward, a bolt of purest light manifesting in her offhand. You are beneath me. I am a dragon, you dull creature. He made a blind swipe for her ankle, which only earned him her scorn. And I will suffer your insolence no more. In a shower of purple gravity magic, Radon took flight, actual flight. To meet her challenge, flight does not make thee a dragon. A wordless roar was his answer. Greyroll scoffed and cast the bolt down with a contemptible flick of her wrist. It skewered the bereaved berserker in the chest, aborting his short-lived charge. Momentum speared him down to the dunes. She landed atop him not a heartbeat later, teeth gone sharp, gaze ablaze. A hand reared back, smashed down atop her crimson spear. The world boiled red. Naruto flung up an arm against it. Even then the resultant eruption of heat and light nearly blinded him for a moment. Since when can she do that? That's not her strength. Kurama jabbed him with a paw. Can't you feel it? She's channeling it from something else, someone else. Maybe so, but it didn't change what he'd just seen. Whoever was empowering her was strong, but not strong enough. He glimpsed the two titans in the smoke. A tail had bloomed from Greyroll's back to ensnare Radon by the waist, reeling him as one might a fish. As he looked on, she grabbed the general, all but mounting him in her fury to get at him. Mine is the true strength of dragons. Flame flickered behind her teeth and she leaned in, as though to kiss him. Care for a taste. Full lips parted in a scream, one that sounded more beast than woman. From her cry, golden fire was born. There was no chance to evade. No time to dodge. Greyroll all but embraced Radon and breathed naked napalm into his face, scalding his visage, his being, his very soul. Radon roared into it and lashed out with both feet, catching her center mass. Naruto heard the awful crack of bone. The startled dragoness hurtled away with a yelp. She was only just rising when a star fell from the sky and smote her into the sands. Well, she's out. Blade set his greatsword in the sand. Finish him, won't you? He's suffered enough. Naruto stepped forth, only to dither at the last second. He'd gone into this battle intending to save Radon, to help him as he had so many others. Now their forces were down to 2, and the general was getting back up. Slowly to be sure, but the burned Hulk was still very much alive. Any moment now, and he'd be upon them. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, fingernails biting down until they drew blood. How had it come to this? In another life, another story, he could have saved him. He knew it. He should have saved him. But if he made one slip here, one mistake, it was over. There was no one left to fight. Fate had conspired against him, and for once, he didn't know how to turn the tables. They'd simply run out of time. Even if he managed to save him, Radon wouldn't thank him for it as he was now. He'd hate him for it, curse him, try to kill him. But still, not everyone can be saved, Naruto. They should be. That was why he'd chosen to stay here. Angry tears stung at his eyes. Why does it have to be me? Blade heaved a sigh and touched a hand to his chest. His palm came away soaked with blood. Because I can't fight that thing. I can't kill Lady Rani's brother. Naruto felt his hackles rise. Wasn't she that witch who met him at the fire? Rani, I know that name. Slip of the tongue, mate. The half-wolf looked away with a wince. Don't dwell on it. A hand clasped his shoulder. He's right, young chum. The deed needs to be done. Naruto nearly slapped his forehead. At this point, he didn't know if he wanted to laugh or cry. Why had the bloody Castellan joined the battle? No, of course he had. Life just loved its little surprises. Of course Jiren would be here to see it all end. He shouldn't have expected any less of the odd duck. He's fought long and hard, he has. The man's mask betrayed nothing when he looked to him, but his emotions shone through it all the same, ringing true. If there was any way to save him, we would have found it by now. Send him to his rest. It had to be him, didn't it? I was supposed to save him. He croaked out. I still want to. You tried, lad. Jiren clapped him on the back. That's what matters. Ask yourself this. If the general was in his right mind, would he be happy with what he's become? Naruto knew the answer. He stepped forward with a heavy heart. Raidon rounded on him, brandishing his blades with a braying roar. An impossibly fast fist snapped into his chin and sent him sprawling onto his back. Credit where it was due, it didn't stop him. He lumbered upward. A rousing roundhouse smashed him down. His swords swept forth in a black blue and were summarily ripped from his grasp. Bones broke. Blood and fingers flew through the air. He didn't use Godric's axe, not once. He beat Raidon the Rotten down with his fists alone and nothing else. Blade whistled behind him. So that's what it looks like. A fight between two demigods. He still didn't consider himself a demigod, no matter what they said. Naruto stalked after the dazed general, trying to steal himself. He'd already made the mistake of underestimating Raidon once, and his allies had paid dearly for his arrogance. That wouldn't happen again. No, never again. Mercy meant nothing here. Whatever state Raidon was in, he'd gone well beyond help. There was only one course left to him. I can't do it. The words escaped him, a low rasp as the wind keened anew. I don't think I can save you. Don't you want me to save you? Raidon only roared at the moon. Give him peace. Naruto's palm snapped out as he snarled, racing and spiraling in hand. Kurama's cloak blazed about him and fed still more energy to the maelstrom. It grew large within his grasp, larger now, largest, until it loomed over the general himself. Impossible to miss. Even if he dodged the first strike, the follow-up would surely finish him off. Even now he hoped against hope. Last chance. His voice cracked. Stand down. Don't make me do this. Perhaps Raidon knew that, because he didn't bring the stars crashing down upon him as he had the others. As he looked on, the general's shoulders slumped, his very being sagging in exhaustion, bone deep. But only for a moment. Then he threw himself forward, barreling down at him in one last wild, suicidal charge. Naruto's arm fell with a thunderclap and a cry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Let there be light. Rani woke from her deep slumber with a frightful start. She felt it, then, his spirit passing in the night. A tear ran down her cheek. Raidon. MELINA felt the battle end. It came not with a whisper, but a roar. She heard the keening of the wind and saw what followed. Stars raced by, freed at last from the general's grasp. One hurtled into the distance and rent a mighty explosion upon the lands between. The kindling maiden fought down a wince. She knew full where it had fallen. Such was the knowledge granted to her by her mother. Such were the trappings of fate, and likewise, they were well known to her. But this, Rani's schemes would begin to move once more. But now was not the time for such thoughts, because she saw him. Naruto crested the dune, Greyroll leaning heavily against him, with Blade and that foolish Castellan not far behind. She paid the latter little mind, because you see, she saw them. Raidon's greatswords, shrunken to fit the blonde's back. Likewise, she beheld the general's great rune etched into the blonde's right arm. Full of lively vigor it was, burning a bright baleful amber over his armor. Orange. The sight drew a bitter laugh from her. It would be orange. Of all the colors. The irony wasn't lost on her. Raidon had ever loved the sight of a sunset. That great big oaf. Mastering her emotions, she wiped a lone tear from her eye and forced herself to rise on trembling legs. The battle is over, then. Naruto laid Greyroll down, ignoring the latter's angry growl. Blade plunked down beside her with a weary sigh. Still he said not a word. Blank blue eyes met hers. It was as if he didn't see her. No, he did see her. He simply stared right through her. He looked tired, hollowed out from the inside. Dread dawned. Had the ruinous rotten Raidon taken hold of him as well? Nay, she didn't sense such. He must be tired. Surely that was all, unless. Realization struck like a thunderclap. Naruto had failed to save Raidon. He'd been so confident, so certain, so sure that he would. And in the end he was left with no choice but to slay the madman. For once, she'd been right. She had proven him wrong. It should have been a pleasant feeling but it wasn't. Where was the pride she'd expected? It tasted like ashes in her mouth. No, this wouldn't do. Victory might yet defeat him. Break him. This could not pass. He had 2 great runes in his. The damage he could cause with such was unimaginable. Only once before had a tarnished accomplished such, and never in such a short time. Like had languished for years to reach this point. Naruto had done all this in less than a month. If he broke now, if he went mad, all her efforts would be for naught or so she told herself. Something else nagged at MELINA. She refused to acknowledge it. Are you happy now? A little voice cooed in her ear. She wasn't. Not at all. MELINA stepped to him quickly, took a handkerchief from her pocket, and used it wiped a bit of blood from his face. You fought well. It could not have ended any other way. It was the wrong thing to say. She regretted it at once. Something hot and angry burned in his eyes. Yet for all his ire, he said not a word. For a moment, just a moment, she felt the icy touch of fear. He looked well and truly furious with her. Indeed he did. Jiren bowled between them with a merry laugh and slung an arm around them both in a hearty embrace, shattering the impasse. A finer fight I've never seen in all my days. Those burly limbs drew them closer than she would have liked, leaving their faces nearly parallel with one another as he squeezed them senseless. Come, let us tend to our wounded. Then we shall make merry. Blade thumped the ground with the flat of his sword. A banquet, then. Suits me just fine. Greyroll raised a trembling fist from where she lay. Will there be wine? As much as you can drink, my lady dragon. He dipped a hand to the flask at his belt, and the moment MELINA took her chance to squirm free. It shall be a feast unlike any other. As she looked on, he poured it out on the sands. A toast. For our new general. Trish and Blade barked a pained laugh where they lay. Naruto's head whipped around with an audible creak as he tore himself free of Jiren. Excuse you. You got blood in your ears, lad. The castellan chortled behind his mask. You slew a demigod in honorable combat. There's no one better to take his place. MELINA noted the curious look of panic in the blonde's eyes just then. So too did Jiren, because he barreled onward before he could recover. If you truly wish to set things right with the rot, then the lads and I would be happy to have you. Still chuckling, he buckled the flask back to his belt and clapped him on the arm once more. Give it some thought. Much to MELINA's relief, Naruto only made an irritated noise. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. His piece said, the castellan sauntered away, waving as he did. It will take some time to prepare another festival, of course. I'll send word when we're ready. Feel free to stay at the castle for as long you please in the meantime. Greyroll tried to rise. Naruto yanked her back down. Her legs flailed in the air as she whined. But wait, you're already punch drunk as is. Blue eyes rolled in mild exasperation. Take a nap. She rolled over to glare golden daggers at him. Who are you to command me? The blonde brow arched her way. She quivered under his stoic stare. Very well. I shall yes, I'll just rest, shall I? That's what I thought. When his gaze swung back to her, MELINA couldn't help but squirm. He looked at her for a long moment, letting her shrivel under his sight like a naughty child. She forced herself to meet his stare. If he thought she'd roll over like that dragon woman, he had another thing coming. She would not be cowed by strength alone. I've been thinking like a ninja, he said at last. Time to start thinking like a tactician. Everyone almost died today because I rushed in. She felt the estranged need to comfort him. They didn't, but they almost did. He clicked his tongue. That's on me. I need to take responsibility for that. MELINA blinked. Was that a flicker of pride she felt just now? No, nay, surely not. She shoved it down. It lingered still, smoldering as Naruto walked away. Exasperated and exhausted, she slumped back to the sand. Where was he off to now? Numb and drained, Naruto finally traipsed back to Millicent. He found her slumbering peacefully, mangled arm bound by a crimson tourniquet as the nameless maiden fussed over her. It was a far cry from the state he'd left her in. When he touched 2 fingers to her throat, he felt her pulse come through, steady and strong. Shame about her arm, though. He'd have to see his way to healing it again or maybe finding her a prosthetic. Thoughts for later. Right now, her health mattered more. How is she? Stable. The nameless maiden bowed her head as he knelt beside her. That was a very brave thing she did. Yeah, unbidden, he found himself reaching out, pushing a strand of red hair from Millicent's eyes. She's a stubborn one. Her nose wrinkled in sleep and he released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Let her sleep. She's earned her rest. If she'd died because of him, no. He didn't want to think about that. There had been enough death this day. Beside him, the maiden took a breath, wriggled a little, then looked to him. Brave tarnished, might I have a moment of your time? Naruto looked away and bristled when he saw Radon looming over her. His shoulders tensed. How? A blink and the general was gone. He scrubbed at his eyes. Seeing things. Had to be. If it's a reward you're after, I don't have much on me. 'Tis not a reward I seek. When he looked back, the maiden was in the process of removing her bloodied mantle. Rich dark hair spilled out, complementing pale golden eyes. He'd never seen a more striking combination. It helped distract him from what he'd just seen. Right? Don't think about it. Focus on her. That'll help. My name is VERYYYY. She stood and introduced herself properly with a polite bow. I believe you are the one that I have been searching for. He blinked, not quite comprehending. For me. What for? She dipped another skittish curtsy. Why, to be your maiden, of course. Blade howled out a laugh where he lay. Naruto could feel MELINA glaring a hole between his shoulders, waiting for his answer. You want to be my maiden? A touch of disbelief must have bled through his words, because she seemed to shrink at his remark. You must be joking. Oh. VERYYYY hung her head. Gravity itself seemed to suck her down. I see. Yes, of course. It was foolish of me to say such a thing. Her shoulders shook and her chest convulsed once. I suppose you're right. After all, who would want a useless wretch like me? Bitter laughter tumbled past her lips. I'm no warrior. I can't even swing a sword. All I can do is heal. She looked so small and lost in that instant. Damn it. Don't you do it. He just couldn't help himself. Hey. He waved his right hand furiously. I didn't say no. I just ... Why me? VERYYYY's head snapped up, red-rimmed eyes regarded him, wet with unshed tears. You're having me on, aren't you? Not about this. You're the strongest warrior I've ever met. She sniffled a little, somewhat chagrined by his remark. Yet you lack the arrogance that often heralds such strength. Her hands came up, ringing themselves against one another as she rambled on. Not only that, you're the first tarnished to hold 2 great runes since Vike himself. You seem fair without being foolish, kind without the naivete that plagues the most gentle souls. And she looked away, wrinkling her little button nose in naked embarrassment. You care for your companions. Her gaze raved over the motley crew of his allies, acknowledging them each in turn. Even a wretch like me can see that. You'd gladly give your life for them. Any of them. Well, I would. But I'm pretty sure there are plenty of other fish in the sea. You're the one I want. She clasped her hands before her face. It has to be you. No one else will do. No one else. How in blazes did you argue with a remark like that? You didn't. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. No one came to his aid. MELINA's gonna kill me. When he turned to look her way, he thought she just might. Her good eye met his in silent judgment. Her mouth opened, closed now, as she saw the resolve in his gaze. Rather than protest, she huffed and vanished in a swirl of blue mist. Her presence lingered nearby, a silent and sullen shadow, sulking at his decision. There would be hell to pay for this later. He just knew it. And yet, all right. It was almost painful to see the MELINA jump at that. If you want to follow me. Yes. He was still speaking when the MELINA hit his chest, an arrow loosed from a bow. Her arms locked tight around him and held on for dear life. He could have pried her off, shoved her away in an instant. He knew he could have. But it would have been like kicking a puppy. Couldn't do it. I finally have a purpose. Thank you. 1,000 thank yous, my lord. Bright, golden eyes shone up at him, framed by a cherubic smile. You'll not regret this, I swear by the fingers. I'm sure we'll get along splendidly. Well, at least she had spirit. Still, for better or worse, Radon was gone, which left him with another matter to deal with, one yet unresolved. Now where in blazes had his clones gotten off to Encaled? The shadow clone had wandered too far. He knew he had, just as he knew the boss was gonna be all sorts of angry once he finally dispelled himself. He'd seen a lot, done a lot too. In all likelihood his memories were gonna give the original a mighty migraine he'd not soon forget. It wasn't his fault. He'd been following orders, him and his brothers, trying to clean up Kaled as best they could with their limited resources. The boss had put him in charge of a sizable squad, even reinforced him with extra chakra to make sure he wouldn't pop in one hit like the rest of the lads. Not much, but enough. As a result of that generous patronage, it was smooth sailing for a while there. They'd torn through a great many beasties, nabbed a bit of loot, even managed to rescue the odd soldier here and there. Yes sir, it was smooth sailing indeed. Until they blundered into that rotten dragon. Things went downhill after that. They'd sent a runner back to the boss of course, only for said dragon to take notice. He'd taken a hit covering for him. Instinct, really. They were just clones. Doppelgangers. Pale imitations of the genuine article. They didn't matter. He'd fully expected to pop like a balloon when all ugly swatted him with his tail. But he hadn't now, had he? Instead he'd awoken in some god-forsaken rainy peninsula, with nothing but a trail of bodies to follow. With a long-suffering sigh he continued down the road. The boss is gonna kill me for this. Irina waited for her death. She knew it was coming, could feel it in her bones. How long had she been sitting her by the wayside, waiting for an end? Minutes, hours, days. Now, her stomach was twisting something terrible, but she had exhausted her meager rations long ago. Her poor eyesight availed her not, her sense even less so. The night was dark and cold, and the rain did precious little for the thin shift she wore. Yet where could she go? Fear held her in thrall. If she were to stand up and walk, she might well blunder into more trouble than she could handle. Without her guards to protect her, she would surely be slain. Yes, better to sit here where it was safe. All she could do was sit and wait for her end. Wait for father to come. Even if that too terrified her. Wait, was that sound like footsteps? Hello? She called out feebly into the rain. Is somebody there? The shuffling footsteps stopped. Oh, she hoped it wasn't another misbegotten. If so, she'd sealed her fate now. Wait. Now they were coming closer. Her heart skipped a single, frantic beat. This was it, then. The end. She would die here, alone and forgotten, and father would never know. Thankfully, the voice that answered was delightedly human. ... What are you doing way out here? You'll catch a cold. Oh, my. His hands were so very warm. She felt like as if she were melting away in his palms. No, nay, focus, Irina. Never mind that. Might I bend your ear for a moment, please? She stumbled over the words hastily before her composure could forsake her further. My name is Irina. I've escaped from Castle Morn to the south. Though the servants there have rebelled, you see. She felt his hands tighten around hers, but still, he didn't speak. That was good, wasn't it? He'd given her a chance to continue. I can't be sure what it is. Exactly, my eyesight's been weak since birth, you see. In her hysteria, she almost giggled at the poor choice of words. But I swear, I heard frightful howling from all over. How did you get away? His voice was low, soothing even. I saw the dead guards. By dint of luck and little else, she wanted to say, yet she stilled her tongue. My good father secreted me out of the castle, but decided himself to stay. He says, she swallowed once to master the surge off ear that followed. It's his duty to stay as commander. That he couldn't come with me just yet. Her visitor made a noise of anger. Duty over his daughter. That ain't right. He agreed. Thank goodness. This might make things a bit easier, given what she was building up to. I fear it's not any different at Castle Morn. Irina dared to thread her fingers through his, improper though such a thing might be. Please, I implore you, would you do me a service? Pretty sure I know what it is. I implore you, take this letter to my father. Taking one hand from his, she retrieved her handkerchief and the words written within, then presented it to him. Let him know that my sole wish is that he escape from that wretched place, even if his honor is the price. Please, here at last, her courage faltered, and her voice with it. I just want him to be safe. A weighty pause followed. Slowly, tenderly, he took the handkerchief with her. I'll do it, but I ain't leaving you here. You're coming with me. Whatever did he mean by that? She would be useless in a fight and Ogachi was carrying her like a princess. Good sir, where are you taking me? Someplace safe. No taking it back now. Shut up and accept my generosity. The clone stomped down the road with sound and aplomb, carrying his charge, face carved from granite. First things first. That castle could wait a while longer. Irina's health mattered more. Best get her out of the rain. And after that, he had to let the boss know what was happening here. Surely he was having an easier time of things, wherever he was. Right? Surely he must be. Have you come to visit again, my dear? Fia patted the empty space beside her, pale fingers creasing the bed in tender invitation. She'd removed her hood and revealed her face to him. Warm firelight from the hearth danced across her lovely visage, casting it molten shades of amber and golden, seeming to set her very body aflame. For some reason, that last thought terrified him. The idea of someone burning alive. Why was he even thinking about that? And so he watched her like a hawk from the doorway, unwilling to approach any further than he already had. I don't think that's a good idea. Why ever not? Her smile was guileless as the grave. I mean you no harm. No harm, she said. That was precisely what worried him. This ... was not what he'd expected to find upon returning to the round table. He'd made the rounds upon his arrival, just to let everyone know he was still alive, to help the girls settle in and convalesce from their wounds. He wasn't sure what drew him here, not when he still needed to call on Roderica and Hugh. But he'd been drawn here nonetheless. Now he found himself hesitating like some skittish fox. Upon further reflection, he found an inkling why. I will take you in my arms as often as you need. Was that what had urged him here? A need for comforts, someone to talk to. There's nothing wrong with that. You're human. Ain't wrong to seek a little solace. It was weak of him, gushing to a perfect strange. He walked Fia's way on leaden legs anyway. Sat beside her, leaned in. His head touched her shoulder. I killed someone today. The words tumbled out of him, and once he started, he couldn't top. Someone who didn't deserve it. Someone who should have lived. It's my fault. She touched a hand to his head. Did you try to save him? Not hard enough. Naruto looked up and saw Radon again. Smaller perhaps, but still every bit the great general he'd face. The man's specter, he could only assume it was such, smiled at him. Why wasn't he angry? He should hate him. And yet his specter only smiled. He looked calm, happy, at peace, despite all the suffering he'd endured. Hale and healthy, he gazed upon him without so much as an ounce of hate in his heart. His lips moved in his open helm, but no sound emerged. What was he saying? What was he trying to tell him? It was too much, the shame and the deed alike. Naruto couldn't bear it ... and averted his eyes. I surmised as much. Fia's gaze traveled to Radon's rune, even now pulsing painlessly in his right arm. This act pained you, did it not? You are a gentle soul. You do not enjoy hurting others, nor do you kill for the sake of killing. True words, more than he dared admit. He bobbed his head, not trusting himself to speak. Just a moment. Fia waved her hand. The doors to her chamber eased shut, sealing off all sounds. Ordinarily, Naruto would have taken issue with that, but he was just so terribly weary. There is nothing wrong with kindness, my dear. When she turned, taking his face in her hands, he couldn't bring himself to resist. Empathy is what makes our kind strong. Her forehead touched his, imparting yet more words with her meager blessing. Never forget that. I am sure that you did all you could. If there had been a way to save him, surely you would have found it. There should have been a way. He glared down into her lap. If I just had more time. Time is something everyone craves, even we tarnished. Again with that moniker. It was the final straw. Naruto surged upright. I ain't a tarnished. His fist flashed back, obliterating a nearby bookshelf. I ain't a demigod, either. He brought his arms crashing down again, splintering the floor. Fia didn't flinch, even then. I'm trying so hard to fix things, and I thought I was doing a good job, but a good man died today because I wasn't strong enough. When he looked at his hands now, he couldn't help but see blood on them. So much blood. I almost lost Millicent and everyone. I can't. I understand. He rounded on her with wild eyes. How? I know what it is to lack strength when needed most. Fia met his gaze evenly, a hint of pain still burning through her bright eyes. I know what it means to fail. Just as I know you aren't tarnished. Fia rose to meet him, as I have known from the moment I first embraced you. She met him halfway, took him by the hands, and tugged him back to her bed despite his outbursts. Even so, I will hold you as long as need be. With that simple act of kindness, the dam broke. Naruto buckled against her with a sob. Fia's slim arms enfolded him, holding him close, and he wept. It's not fair. MELINA found breakfast a lively affair. Truth be told, it came as a surprise to the kindling maiden. After last night's disaster, everyone's exhaustion, and subsequent retreat to the round table hold, she'd expected it to be something of a dour affair. A sullen and somber repast with little in the way of words or camaraderie. It was not. Come morning, most of their merry little band had licked their wounds, not enough to be fit for combat, not yet, but enough to move. Those that couldn't were carried to the great table by Naruto's clones whether they liked it or not. Once there all were greeted by a most startling sight. Come and get it. One of Naruto's clones banged a ladle against a cracked pot. We've got a bit of everything for ya. The weapons had been plucked free from its surface and set aside, making way for a grand banquet, all while that large shard of grace hovered above. MELINA couldn't help but balk at the sight. She didn't even recognize some of those dishes. Here she spied a rasher of bacon. There, bowls of porridge served with a side of eggs and some fruit besides, but that was where her admittedly limited expertise ended. There might have been a bit of mutton off to the side, and there were strange circular bits of what she assumed to be bread dripped in honey and syrup. She knew at once who was responsible for this. What she didn't know was when he did it. How could one man make such a feast in only a few hours? For all its bells and whistles, the round table hold was still a place where champions gathered. Champions had to eat, and eat they did. Once word spread, Tarnish descended upon the table en masse. He even deigned to join them, removing his helmet for the first time in her living memory. Quite pale he was. Handsome, too. Who would have thought? And there was Sorcerer Rogier, lively as ever, limping only a little now that his legs had been tended to. And there was shy little Roderica, breaking away from her spirit tuning long enough to fetch a plate for Master Hugh. Derlina went with her, simple soul that she was. Others proved more lively. Greyroll descended upon the meat dishes with gusto, alas that brought her into conflict with Trish, the tree sentinel not at all keen on sharing. Millicent alone had yet to make an appearance, but she suspected the redhead would be roused soon enough by the ruckus. Truly, her Tarnished had a frightful penchant for attracting the most unlikely allies. Everyone tucked in, grateful for their meal. Those who weren't fond of such gatherings didn't linger over long. Korin and Dailos took their portions and departed to their own corners of the hold to feast in private. Some, like the all-knowing, didn't deign to show their faces at all, and thus it fell to the ever-silent Ensha to fetch food for him. She even glimpsed the warrior woman Nephili for all of a moment. She snatched a plate and scurried away before anyone else could notice. But of Naruto himself, he was nowhere to be seen. Troubling, she could see his clones surely enough, flitting from one tarnish to another as they served food. But the original wasn't among them. Her eye told her that much, and so she left the feast in search of him. The round table hold wasn't overly large. She was certain it would be an easy task. Indeed, it was imperative that she have words with him. She'd seen the pain in his eyes, muted, buried, but still present nonetheless. For better or worse, his failure with Radon had marked him. What manner of mar that would be remained to be seen. She would have to watch him carefully in the following days, lest he break. And if he does, once more that little voice nagged at her as she glided through the corridors. She'd begun to fear that it, her conscience, would never let her be. What will you do then? Then she would find another. Liar. Nonsense. She cared not a jot for what happened to him. Liar, liar. No, she could not care. She could not afford to care. Liar, liar, liar. Your champion carries a great burden. I pray it does not break him. Melania scowled at the soft voice as much as the newcomer's approach. She'd been so fixated on the search that she hadn't sensed her arrival. Sure enough, when she craned her neck back, she found a familiar hooded visage gazing back at her. That fair face with green eyes downturned, wearing only a faint smile. Fia, of course it would be Fia. She should have known that wily woman would try to get her claws into her tarnished. What manner of poison had she poured in his ear to make him act this way? No, focus. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her stress, no matter how tightly wound she was at the moment. His fate is not yours to know. She scowled at the deathbed companion. Leave him be. That is his choice to make. Her retort was gentle, but she sensed the steel in her words all the same. You cannot do so for him. Millicent yelped somewhere in one of the adjacent rooms. My lord, no. They can walk. Nope. Up you go. Wait. It's embarrassing. You don't need to carry me. Judging by the way her words trailed off into a squeak, the matter had been settled. Naruto was nothing if not stubborn. Still, for him to be so forward, an ugly thought dawned. What have you done to him? Fia leaned against a crumbling bookshelf, the very picture of decorum. You already know. Melina most assuredly did not. She only suspected Fia's misdeeds, and the appalling lack of certainty gnawed at her. Anger coiled in her heart, an ugly twisted root more grotesque than Godwin's ghastly form itself. She bit down on it with all her might, smothered the desire to strangle the woman before her, and comported herself once more. Only then did she dare speak. I would have it said, if you must. The damnable black-robed harlot smiled softly, a small secretive smirk of triumph that made Melina's blood blaze anew. I emboldened him. He came to me last night, at his wit's end, and I comforted him. As is my purpose. Must not kill. And what manner of comfort didst thou bequeath to him? I held him when he cried. Her words rang true, making Melina recoil. Cry? She didn't think he could cry. But the deathbed companion was still speaking, and with each word, so did her resolve falter. When he shouted, I listened. When he faltered, I set him upon the path once more. Those full lips pursed into a scowl. Would that you had done the same. He would not have come to me in the first place. Any fury Melina might have felt guttered out, taking the fire in her with it. Explain thyself. Are you truly so blind, dear girl? Fia stepped in, laid a hand on her shoulder. Lips like ice brushed her ear, sending a succulent shiver shooting down her spine. How naive you are, how little you have done for him. She tried to pull away, but that cold grasp, those biting words, held her fast. Art thou not his maiden, Melina? Is it not thy purpose to aid him in all things? She scowled at her. I have aided him. Have you, now? Those piercing green eyes pierced her lone orb. T would not seem so. And what do you know? Melina's temper slipped its leash. Quick as a flash her hand flitted out, seizing the other woman's chin. While you hid away here, I have fought by his side in battle, and guided him on the path to being a lord. Fia didn't waver. And yet you do not know his heart as I do. The words were a blade in her heart. Her piece said. Fia released her and sashayed away. Melina watched her go, wishing nothing more than to drive a dagger through her back. Alas, the hold prevented such gratifying violence. Even if it didn't, she knew such an act would ruin everything. Damn her. Damn that deathbed companion to the darkest pit, because her words rang true. He should have come to her. Why didn't he? Had she not tried to assuage his guilt after the battle with Radon? She had. Had she not offered to turn his runes to strength time and time again, only to be rebuffed? Had she not spoken kind words to him, congratulated him on battles well fought? Had they not been honest with one another? She'd done all these things and more, and yet it was not her counsel he sought. Naruto often went his own way of his own will, and to hell with the consequences. The best she could do was aim him in a given direction. A seed of doubt planted itself in MELINA's fractured heart. They had an accord, he and her, the two of them. Slowly, inexorably the seed took root. What if he cast her aside? Now it sprouted. Her vision tunneled, world darkening around the edges as her breath hitched in her throat. She caught herself on a wall to steady herself. He'd already heard Greyrol call her a kindling maiden. Did he suspect? Was that why he avoided her? He must never know her true purpose, for if he did, he would surely seek to stop her. It had to be this way. She mustn't get attached. She was meant to burn, and in doing so guide him unto destined death. If he learned what would become of her, he would usurp her purpose, the reason for her birth, her creation, the sole reason Mother had made her. To lose that ... it would destroy her. Such a thought, she could not bear it, but what if it came to be? Her fingernails bit into the wall. Calm, be calm. She spurred herself forward once more. After what felt like an eternity, she found Naruto in the kitchen. Pan in hand, he flipped a strange fluffy white on brown thing into the air. End over end it spun, yet he caught it with ease, hummed to himself, laid it out upon a plate. One of his many clones came quick to sweep it away to join the others, snatching up a bit of butter and pitcher of what smelled like syrup as it went. Or perhaps it was honey. In her frazzled state, she couldn't be sure. What is that? Pancakes. He grinned over his shoulder at her approach, bright as the sun. Wanna try one? MELINA knew not what these pancakes were, but they smelled wonderful. Still, there was her dignity to consider. I have no need of food. Her stomach growled. She flushed. Naruto grinned. Come on. Quick as a flash, he carved off a decent bit of said pancake, stuck an iron fork into it, and offered the confection up unto her. Leaning back availed her not, he all but jabbed her lips with it. Her lone eye flitted down, eyeing it with mild trepidation. Part of her wanted to deny him, but he looked so proud. Refusing now would be like kicking a puppy. Very well. She opened her mouth and let him feed her. Well, he grinned as she chewed, swallowed now. How's it taste? Delicious. Her pride would never allow her to admit such, of course. Nay, she'd call it adequate and wonderful. Curses, betrayed by her treacherous tongue again. Course correct. Now, I wasn't aware of your culinary skills. Great. Good to know I got a batch right. I screwed up so many times. She glimpsed it again, that sliver pain in his eyes as he spun away but dulled, distant as he returned to his tasks. He'd done well to keep himself distracted. Perhaps that was the true reason for this fantastic feast. He was busying himself with so many projects, the better to bury it. Far be it from her to tell him otherwise. Haven't really perfected this yet. His grin was almost sheepish as he rambled on. Fitting, given some of the fare he'd made. Clones found a bunch of old cookbooks back in Kaled. Read 'em, too. When they popped, I got their memories. I see. MELINA really didn't, much less understand the concept of his clones, but far be it from her to ruin his good mood ... And what was he doing? With neither word nor warning, he flitted sideways with vulpine grace and took her by the arm, tugging her away. A spreading flower of red bloomed across her face. Was she blushing? No, never. In the end she let him lead her back to the table and guide her into a seat. He took the one beside her, grinning fit to burst. There you are. Greyrol grinned at him. Finally decided to join us, have you? Yup. He laughed as he slid into his eat. Sorry for being late. Everyone enjoying the food. A chorus of assents answered him. Millicent granted him a demure nod. Trish pumped a fist into the air. They were certainly a motley crew, all things considered. A man from another world, herself a kindling maiden, and a tree sentinel. One mustn't forget the dragonkin woman nor their resident redhead. Toss in that fulsome fop of a finger maiden alongside timid Roderica, and a few others, and they had the beginnings of a, is this what I think it is? Rogier laid his plate down with a rueful grin. Are we calling a war council? Greyrol bared her fangs his way. Silence, sorcerer. You're only sitting here at all because he took pity on you. Hey. Naruto raised both hands before things could escalate further. Calm down. We're all friends here. There's nothing wrong with helping someone if they're in pain. Rogier bobbed his head, setting his hat swaying. For which I'm quite grateful, friend. And here thought I'd never be able to walk again. I'm in your debt. Speaking of which, Naruto pivoted in his seat. Don't think I've forgotten about you over there, Trish. Sure enough, the tree sentinel wilted under his stoic glare. I haven't given up on giving you back your voice. I still want to know who messed you up like that. When she looked fit to protest again, he changed tack. Clever boy that he was. You want me to fix up that arm of yours again while I'm at it, Millicent rubbed the stump of her arm thoughtfully, not meeting his gaze. Later, perhaps. Something wrong? Well, yes. She squirmed a little and hung her head in sullen shame. I'm considering leaving. On a journey. I've started to recall, however dimly my destiny. Roger made an intrigued noise. And what destiny is that, my fair lady? In truth, Millicent peered into her porridge. I am not sure. It feels as if something's calling me to the north. Melina's gaze snapped toward, alarm crying out in her heart. Had she begun to remember her origins? That might prove problematic. How much more would Millicent yet remember in time? If allowed to go her own way unsupervised, she might well become a problem in the future, to say nothing of her sisters. Under no circumstances could they and MELINA be allowed to meet. They would bloom and bloom and bloom again, rotting all in their path. It would be a disaster. Not alone. You're not. Naruto's response brought her no small amount of relief. We can talk about that once we've finished here. Their resident redhead perked up. My lord. He grinned. Ain't no way I'm letting you do this by yourself. Millicent's pale face flushed to the very roots of her hair. As you wish. D stood and tugged his helmet back on. My thanks for the meal, but I've no interest in a council. My path is my own. Fair enough. Naruto flicked a lazy wave his way. We'll be here if you change your mind. Good hunting. The hunter paused, then inclined his head. His gaze swiveled over, then, alighting upon Trish. Melina thought she saw a spark of something there. Whatever the key, the silent sentinel granted him a grave nod of her own, and though she could not speak, some unseen message seemed to pass between the two warriors. To you as well, D said at last, and went his way. That's just the way he is. Rogier's affable laugh wiped the tension away like a warm summer's breeze. Still chuckling, he rose from the table and snatched up his cane. Once again, many thanks for the feast. He gave a polite bow as best his recovering legs would allow, then turned as though to hobble after his friend. I'll go have a word with him. Please, carry on without me in the meantime. Which reminds me, Naruto declared apropos of nothing, I wanna break Hyuga out of his chains, soon. Thoughts? Millicent nodded her approval. Roderica nearly spat out her tea. Is that even possible? The poor spirit tuner sounded almost hopeful as she looked to him. He was cursed by Queen Marika herself. Melina knew he was going to try regardless. He had that look in his eye, the one that made the impossible quite possible. Sure enough, his fist thumped down on the table. Curse or not, it ain't right. I think you might be able to help. Roderica sputtered. Me? I'm just a spirit tuner, not even a very good one. Nonsense. You're great. Well, we do have 2 great runes. Thorlina finally found enough courage to interject. Perhaps we could go to the capital right now and seek an audience with Queen Marika. No. Naruto all but bit off the word, plunging the room into silence. No. Thorlina flinched, doe-like eyes gone wide. My lord, why ever not? Melina's spirit sank all the way down to her ankles. Whatever was he up to now? Not yet, at any rate. He wiped his mouth with a bit of silk cloth, polished off his drink, and leaned back in his chair. His posture rather reminded Melina of someone she'd seen before, and the memory pricked her most painfully indeed. I want to help people, but Khalid was an eye-opener for me. We can't go in blind like that again. His gaze swept over each of them in turn. I don't want to see any of you get hurt. Millicent perked up. Greyroll and Trish looked away. Melina felt a curious pang in her heart. She tried to ignore it. Was it truly that bad? Roderica inquired. I know the demigods are terrifying. Still, their finger maiden tried to rally. But to become Elden Lord, you must seek the Erd Tree. And I will. Naruto reassured her. When I'm good and ready. He looked away, scratching his cheek. Okay, and when will that be? Melina cursed herself even as she spoke. Gods above, was she really siding with her? Of all people, this is not something you can put off forever. This world is in dire need of repair. And, he enunciated slowly, making his point clear, I'm gonna do my best to fix it. You have my word. Trust me, I don't think we should rush this. Absently, he began to rub the rune ring on his finger, massaging the glowing trinket in careful strokes. I think something awful might happen if we do. We gotta be careful, you know. Melina stilled. He knew, or suspected something, at the very least. Still, his words seemed to be enough for Trish and Greyroll. Neither protested. Millicent and Roderica merely nodded. Thorlina looked fit to argue, then demurred with a pained nod. As you command ... my lord. Then I suggest we return to Limgrave. Greyroll put in. I have a child there in need of discipline. Another in Liurnia of the Lakes, as well. They would make for powerful allies. Wait, I thought you said you were leaving once we dealt with Radon. She made an amused noise. I've decided to extend my stay. Naruto perked up. Sure, don't see why not. They all agreed, one by one. Not a single one of them took her side. It was too much. Melina couldn't bear the way they looked at him, even now. No, this was more than that. If he didn't go to the capital, if he did not seek the Erd Tree, then things would remain as they were. If things remained as they were, she could not obtain the rolled medallion, without which she wouldn't be able to guide him to the Forbidden Lands. And if they did not go there then the Erd tree would not burn. It had to burn. It must burn. Her sealed eye began to twitch anew. She settled her hand on his. May I have a word? She'd not thought to find him here. There it was, the bitter truth. Nephili hated it. She'd fled from Naruto in shame, run from her weakness and the look in his eyes. Like a scared little girl. Father had chided her for it, even as she relayed news of Godric's death. Conduct unbefitting of the Round Table. He'd called it. He'd been right. Her will had faltered. She'd been granted a glimpse of her own death and fled from it as a craven would from the battlefield. And now she'd stumbled upon him here. He'd changed in her absence. Nephili could see it in his eyes. That fire was still there, but it was tempered now. Banked by loss. It didn't take much to see why. She recognized the second great rune carved into his arm, burning like wildfire. He and his companions had faced General Radon. They'd not come out unscathed either. There were new faces at the table, a woman with draconic features, a wounded redhead, and a bashful young woman clad in the robes of a finger maiden. She had no right to approach him again. Even now, hurting as he was, that was a right she must earn, a pride to reclaim. She could only watch him from afar. Watch as his maiden laid a hand on his, leaned in, and whispered something in his ear. She forced herself to be still, to observe now, as the pair made their excuses and departed for a smaller room. Her mind conjured forth wild images of what they might be up to, and unbidden, she found herself stepping forward. She caught herself a heartbeat later, until their paths crossed again, until she redeemed herself. Until then, Naruto knew a storm when he saw one, and the look in Melina's eyes, stormy as they came. He let her drag him to an empty room, allowed her to shut the door shut behind her. She didn't bother to lock it, because the moment those doors closed, she leaned against them, one hand fisted roughly against the wood, and she almost seemed to lean against it for strength. Her head kissed the worn wood with a sigh. What art thou doing, tarnished? He didn't like her tone, liked even less that he couldn't see her face, that she wouldn't look at him. Is this about the Elena? No response, not even a twitch. Could you stop sulking? She needed a place to belong. How kind. Melina rounded on him, eerily calm as she looked up at him. And how many more misfits will you take in before this is done? Her visible eye blazed a bright, molten gold. How many do you intend to bring to the Round Table? Still her voice did not waver. Well, I would have your answer. As many as it takes to fix this world. Naruto palmed his face and exhaled in a sullen sigh when she didn't butte. You're going to be difficult about this, aren't you? Difficult. He knew it was the wrong thing to say, because the moment he did, the kindling maiden stomped on his foot and seethed up at him. Considering you've taken a second maiden into your service. Yes, I think I'm going to be difficult about this. Why do you even care? Melina hissed out an angry breath. You dare? Damn straight I do. He bowled forward to tower over her. I respect ya, and I value your input, but you've been pissy ever since the Elena joined us. What's your problem? She bridled. You took another maiden. No. He shook his head, sensing the lie. Nice try, but I'm not buying it. There's more to this than that. Is it because I won't go to the capital yet? Her emotions blazed. He couldn't make sense of them, much less discern her answer. Yes, no, maybe so. He risked a glance over her shoulder and spied Radon's specter in the shadows. The dead demigod stared back and spoke again. He still couldn't hear the words. No, no, no. He was not seeing that. Another thought struck him, then. Frantic for a distraction, he seized on it. Earlier, Greyroll called you a kindling maiden. What does that mean? Her jaw snapped shut, and with it, his anger began to boil anew. So secretive, this one. He hated secrets. Not gonna tell me. Fine, I'll do this my way. He thumped a fist against his chest. I won't let anyone else die. So don't worry. Just as you didn't let Radon die. Her words tore open the wound in his heart. Naruto's gaze snapped into scarlet slits. Beneath that smoldering stare, Melina flinched. He could see that she regretted what she'd said, but it didn't change the fact that she'd said it in the first place. She'd wanted to hurt him for a moment, and she had. Even now she tensed, expecting an outburst. He wanted to give her one, to rant and rave and rage at her, as he'd had toward Fia. No, I'm better than that. He closed his eyes, inhaled, exhaled now, breathing out his anger with it. When next they opened, those smoldering scarlet orbs were blue once more. Melina didn't budge an inch. So stubborn. Even scared out of her wits, she was just so damn determined. He didn't blame her. He was much the same. He stood his ground. So did she. Something had to give. Eventually, one of them did. Had to happen, sooner or later. Rely on me more. Melina whispered suddenly, startling him. Confide in me. Let me share your burdens. Her head snapped up. He glimpsed a flash of tears. Melina, wait a sec. She most certainly did not. She growled, shoved him against the wall, and stepped in, blocking his body with hers. Scarred hands reached up, grabbed him by the face, and yanked his lips down to hers. It was not a gentle kiss by any means of measure, an act born of equal parts frustration and misery on her part. Their teeth jarred together with a harsh click and he felt something sink into his lip. Pain sparked and he grunted in surprise. PH. It lasted all of an instant, then the kindling maiden jerked back, face red, chest heaving, lone eye glaring great golden daggers at him. Her mouth worked wordlessly, trying and failing to form proper words. She looked horrified, as though she couldn't believe what she'd just done. That made two of them. He couldn't believe it either. Who would have thought that fiery, feisty woman was capable of such? Look what you've made me do. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as a hoarse sob. You've ruined everything. Reflexively, his hands tightened around her waist in a vain attempt to comfort her. It spooked MELINA instead. She dissolved in his arms, vanishing into so much blue dust before he could so much as utter a word. That dust hurtled through the cracked door, leaving him with his thoughts and the shock that followed. Well, that happened. Naruto touched a finger to his mouth, winced as it came away bloody. He blinked slowly, still not quite comprehending. How could he? Kurama had gone quite silent. As such, he was left to stew in his own thoughts. They weren't unpleasant ones. Did she really think he'd been ignore her? Was that why she wanted him to rely on her more? He hadn't meant to ignore her at all. Someone eased through the door, pushing it open. Greyroll slipped in. I'm not interrupting, am I? Not anymore. No, he muttered, still dazed. You're good. She looked about. And your maiden? Where is she? Probably hiding from him. She ran off already. Her smile worried him. Did she now? Oi. He scowled, trying to quell the sudden flutter in his stomach. What's that look for? Nothing. Said smile became a smug smirk. If she wishes to throw a tantrum and flee like a child, then I care not a jot. She stepped to him and idly he noticed her tail. Unlike her wings folded neatly against her back, it almost seemed to be swaying in thinly veiled glee. Almost made him think of a dog. He didn't dare utter the words aloud. Thankfully he didn't have to, for her words filled the silence between them. Dragons prize strength above all else. Another step now, her fail flicking out to slam the door shut behind her. Strength of character, strength of arms, strength of spirit. You've shown me all this and more. If she cannot see such, or rather, if she refused to, then 'tis her loss. Is this going somewhere? It is. Greyroll stepped into him fully, linked both arms behind his neck, and pressed her forehead to his. Mate with me. Now. Naruto's jaw clicked open with an audible pop. One word came to mind. Biwa. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 3. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author NeonZangetsu on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.